Our story kicks off with a young guy named Ryu Han Bin snapping awake to another empty day. He drags himself out of bed long after noon, feeling wrecked, like sleep never even happened. A few months earlier, he'd come back from the army and decided to finally cut himself some slack. Since then, he'd failed to find either a passion or a goal worth holding on to. The only things that really hooked him were video games, fast food, and endless Netflix binge runs. But at one point, that sugar-coated lifestyle comes to a brutal stop and shatters for good. An unknown force yanks him out of his familiar world without warning and drags him into another space entirely. A guy used to lazy days realizes fast that there's no road back anymore. Everything around him looks black and white, and he can't even tell what kind of place this is. Dozens of other people stand nearby, just as lost, scanning the void in silence. An administrator activates a new system where humans are forced to clear trials and raise their stats. Each person is sent to an unfamiliar world where the path of progression begins. But right from the start, things go sideways, and the administrator screws up. Instead of sending Han with the other rookies, the admin straight up loses him, about as cleanly as Netflix drops good shows after Season 1. That's how he ends up inside a simulation of Zelhalatna, a land destined to become his new home. In this world, there's only one rule: survive and level up. The first few hours are pure chaos, and more than once Han brushes against death. Hellish dogs swarm him non-stop, and holding them back feels almost impossible. He doesn't get a single second to process what's happening or deny reality. Instinct takes over, forcing him to adapt and survive at any cost. Every clash with a monster grants experience points and sharpens his skills. The moment he kills his first hell dog, a new journey truly begins. Han can barely accept that this is real and that burgers and ice-cold soda are gone for good. If he couldn't even land a girlfriend in his old life, thinking about that now is pointless. With his starting stats, his survival odds in this land don't even hit 5%. Everything feels like a cruel joke pulled by the gods themselves. The system hands out his first weapon, automatically assigning him the warrior class. That's when the endless grind of hell officially starts. The first steps are painful, heavy, and unforgiving. He doesn't know yet that the administrator forgot about him and that the system itself is bugged. After the first week, his body slowly starts adjusting to the new conditions. Constant battles drain him dry, and soreness becomes his default state. The monsters keep leveling up, and every day the fights get nastier. In just 1 week, a soft-spoken guy turns into a cold-blooded killer. His first skills unlock Cut and Pain Strike. Han finds a place to hide, turning it into a temporary shelter for long, lonely nights. All he can do is roast and eat the meat of monsters he killed with his own hands. Sometimes he thinks back to the moment he was transported and realizes other players must exist somewhere. The thought of meeting them eases the loneliness, even if just a little, and sparks hope. Once he reaches level 5, he'll be allowed to leave this area and see other people. The news gives him hope, but the road to level 5 promises pain. Han wanted to go home, yet instead he's forced to jump worlds and fight monsters. He has no choice but to accept this new reality and the fact that the Hell Dogs will only grow stronger. He sets a goal and swears to level up before the next month begins. Loneliness presses down hard, and the constant conversations inside his own head become unbearable. Over time, his muscles harden, tightening like steel cables. His hands grip the sword with confidence as it claims monster heads day after day. Experience points keep stacking, and killing slowly turns into routine. From time to time, real threats appear, since monster levels never stand still. But Han never once considers retreat, and does everything it takes to someday leave this blood-soaked land behind. The moment he finally raised his level and braced himself to switch worlds, another piece of bad news hit him cold. The system glitched out, and his level was forcefully rolled back. It meant only one thing: he was going nowhere, and the land of Hell Dogs was now his forever home. His stats kept climbing, experience kept stacking, yet his level stayed nailed to the ground. It all felt like a cruel cosmic joke, as if the gods got bored and decided to mess with him directly. Meanwhile, the monsters' levels kept rising like nothing was wrong at all. Day by day, the Hell Dogs grew bigger, meaner, and deadlier. Just to stay alive, he had to evolve alongside this savage world. Day after day, Han slaughtered monsters, clinging to the hope that the system would someday wake up. But every night ended the same way, with an empty stare and the realization that nothing had changed. Time dragged on, he kept changing, yet the situation felt frozen in place. At some point, the Hell Dogs started to look like true spawn of hell, creatures that simply refused to die. It was like endless grinding with zero progress, power without movement. After 7 long years in this hell, he noticed something strange. Players didn't age. Minor wounds healed within hours, and accumulated experience never vanished. The system stopped granting new skills, but his basic techniques were pushed to their absolute limits. The Hell Dogs didn't lag behind either, constantly boosting their abilities as if mocking him. Han had to adapt faster and faster, slowly shedding his humanity and turning into a pure killing machine. Sometimes he fell asleep and woke up in his old room from his past life. Familiar smells of home hit his senses, peace, safety, and a long-forgotten carelessness. But the illusion shattered fast, dragging him back into reality where survival meant fighting again. Over time, the system began regularly offering him an option to end his life, branding it as a simple solution. He had lived in this world for over 10 years, and his sanity was starting to crack. To keep himself from completely losing it, he grabbed his sword again and again. That was how he prepared for the trials that were bound to come sooner or later. Over the years, Han even managed to build a house of his own. Inside, it felt like a warm refuge, even though a brutal world raged beyond its walls. Days flew by in a blur of combat and survival. Against all odds, he stubbornly held on to optimism and believed something better waited ahead. Everything collapsed on the day a newly evolved monster destroyed his home. It was a direct hit to both his hope and his pride. He had spent 3 years building that place, pouring not just effort, but his soul into it. The monster that wrecked his home would pay dearly for it. Years of hunting had taught Han every habit of the Hell Dogs. He knew how they thought, how they read the battlefield, and how they attacked. Even with their growth and evolution, predicting their moves had become second nature. Stuck at level 1, he pushed his body beyond limits, turning muscle into living armor. Now, he looked like a Hulk without the green, stuck on level 1 longer than Bethesda fixes bugs, accidentally turning into a broken powerhouse. Even the most dangerous monsters couldn't hold him back for long anymore. And still, no matter how brutal it got, he kept believing there was a way out ahead. One day, the administrator began a massive cleanup across the worlds. Players were relocated, locations updated, and new trials created. During the process, he stumbled upon an old, forgotten box he hadn't touched in years. When he opened it, horror struck. Someone was still alive inside. The administrator was shaken by the realization that one player had been completely forgotten in the world of Hell Dogs. His thoughts immediately shifted to damage control and how to erase the problem quietly. Killing a player without warning was forbidden, but loopholes always existed. Sending him somewhere survival was impossible, would solve everything on its own. The administrator was convinced a level 1 player was completely harmless. He had no idea that years in the blood-soaked wasteland had sharpened this guy's skills beyond reason. Han had just finished a solid dinner and was already mapping out tomorrow in his head. He planned to build a new house, anything to dull the gray weight of isolation. Those plans shattered fast when reality came crashing in. The world began to shift, and the system wiped the player's future clean almost instantly. The administrator expected Han to die quietly and vanish without a trace, like a bug no one cares about until it starts messing with the stats. All that remained was a thin hope that this guy might cheat fate and grab luck by the tail. After the transfer, Han landed in a world that looked disturbingly close to Earth. The air carried the scent of fresh grass, insects humming softly all around. But monsters lived here too, creatures that burned with hatred toward players. For the first few minutes, he couldn't believe he was really standing in another world. A rush of pure freedom burst out of him, raw and overwhelming. He dove into the water, fully submerged, feeling fresher than he had in years. In that moment, the system updated his status and coldly noted that he was now in Ratna. His primary objective was listed without mercy: eliminate one of the 6 goddesses of this world. To do that, he would need to hide his origins and join a hunter guild. First, though, he had to deal with the monster already closing in. This was nothing like the Hell Dogs he'd spent years fighting. Standing before him was a massive blue dragon with blood-red eyes. It breathed fire, but failed to catch the player off guard. Han closed the distance in a flash and threw a punch with the force of Mike Tyson at full swing. Even he didn't expect it. Until now, he had always relied on his sword alone. Long ago, a knightly order once thanked the gods for encountering a dragon named Afir. That dragon had aided humans until a foolish king forced his way into the story. The king wanted a ride, and it ended in a tragic death. Every knight who loved the dragon was executed, though one managed to save Afir. From that day on, the dragon was forced to hide in the dark caves of a distant forest. Humans constantly tried to kill him, especially visitors from other worlds. Effer learned one rule for life: outsiders could not be trusted and had to be erased. Sensing an intruder, the dragon lunged to kill Han and failed. Unlike true dragons, Aphir was not a full-blooded dragon but a wyvern. Han didn't care about that in the slightest. He was here for answers, not titles. He didn't appreciate being labeled a demon from another world. He wanted to understand why players were hated here and how Ratna truly functioned. Once upon a time, the locals had peacefully coexisted with outsiders. That changed when players began slaughtering Ratnians for faster leveling. The strongest among them formed a group called Great Earth and declared a hunt for the goddesses. As their levels rose, so did their power and influence. Over time, they turned into lunatics no one could stop. It continued until true heroes finally stepped in. The Sword Lord Bao and the Archmage Genobia were the first to rise against them. They were joined by the assassin Karhan and the Lord of Life and Death, Holly-Ann. The four heroes of the continent quickly ended the war, placing the burden of peace on the six goddesses. From that day on, Earth was branded an ally of otherworldly demons, and outsiders were executed without trial. After decades in a blood-soaked wasteland, Han struggled to grasp that he'd entered a world where everyone wanted him dead. The whole situation reeked of cruelty and deliberate malice. No matter how the cards were stacked, he would do whatever it took to return home, even if the path forward was paved with corpses. Several days passed after his encounter with the wyvern. Once he escaped the dark forest, towering fortress walls rose on the horizon. It was the city of Onpros, massive, crowded, and impossible to miss from afar. In the nearby forest, dozens of dungeons have been hiding for years, packed with nightmare-grade monsters. Many hunters gamble their lives for fast cash, operating through the local guild. Everyone who comes to Onpros is either already a hunter or dreams of becoming one. In reality, most of them are weak links, nowhere near ready for anything serious. That day, the guild doors swung open as a massive bodybuilder stepped inside. An obvious outsider from another world, clearly here to kick off a hunter career. The hall froze. No one had ever seen a human that big and that built. He looked like someone who'd been fed steroids instead of baby formula, with doctors long ago giving up and deciding to see how wild the result would be. The instant Han stated his intention to become a hunter, hands shot towards sword hilts. Before coming to the guild, he had already settled everything in advance with Aphir. The dragon carefully explained how one was supposed to behave inside the city. First priority was clothing. Walking the streets naked was not an option. After confirming the human wasn't dangerous and had no urge to randomly start killing, the dragon promised his support. Knowing full well that only he could see system parameters, Han showed no embarrassment and changed clothes right in front of his new acquaintance. During their talk, he realized that meeting a goddess would demand serious effort. Only the strongest warriors of this world were worthy of an audience with a goddess. That meant slaughtering monsters and earning fame through endless battles. Along the way, Han fully confirmed that system stats were visible to him alone. Whenever he reacted to system prompts, the dragon stared as if the guy's brain had short-circuited. Once the conversation ended, the player headed straight for the Hunter Guild. On the way, he got a new hairstyle, which made him look slightly ridiculous by local fashion standards. A female administrator greeted him warmly and was ready to register a new hunter. All that was required was naming a previous guild to confirm qualifications. Han honestly admitted he had never worked as a hunter and was starting from zero. The hall tensed, hands drifting toward weapons. He was instantly suspected of being an outsider. Outsiders weren't welcome here, so to avoid trouble, the newcomer had to show his level. He calmly placed his hand on the measuring device, confident everything would go smoothly. In his mind, he already saw the looks of awe forming around him. Han was sure his skills were on another tier and that he'd become an instant local legend. He even mentally rehearsed a grand promise to wipe out every demon in the Dark Forest. Everything went sideways when the system displayed that he was nothing more than a level 5 hunter. The system labeled him a Sword King, and the hall froze for exactly 1 second, before realizing he was a level 5 legend and bursting into laughter. The laughter rolled through the hall so loudly it felt like even the deaf and blind were cracking up. Even the administrator struggled to hold it together, though she did apologize. Many had expected an outsider, but fighters from other worlds usually started at level 20 or higher. A 5th level instantly cleared Han of all suspicion. On top of that, he didn't even have the money for the entry fee. He had to take the last of Aphir's coins just to avoid complete humiliation. It turned out that outsiders from Earth normally received funds automatically, and he alone got nothing. After all the embarrassment, he finally received his first hunter badge. With a 5th level rank, he couldn't just stroll out and solo a dungeon. He needed to find a team of experienced hunters, like the one led by the overconfident Raud. That guy called himself the best hunter in the city and was already level 27. He'd recently put together a solid squad and was more than happy to take a newbie for the dirty work. His group also included a quiet, mysterious red-haired guy, a level 37 mage who deliberately suppressed his stats to stay under the radar. His name was Otis, and he immediately noticed that the Sword King was stronger than he looked. Raud, as usual, acted eccentric and loudly tried to recruit the newcomer. At one point, he tested the sword's weight and realized even 2 hunters couldn't lift it. Han looked at him like he was seriously considering whether to erase him on the spot. He absolutely hated it when someone touched his weapon without permission. For the first time since entering the guild, he openly showed his strength, lifting the massive sword with one hand. No strain, no effort. The calm voice, steady confidence, and fearless stare instantly drew the attention of a veteran hunter squad. It felt like this was exactly the kind of man they'd been missing to finally chase down their long-held ambitions. Every second, the tension kept climbing, like a serious clash was about to ignite. The room held its breath, expecting blood, because the air itself already screamed combat. Everyone wanted to know how a level 5 guy dared to challenge a level 25 fighter. Bork stepped in fast, unwilling to watch talent like that get wasted on nonsense. He immediately recognized Han's skills and openly showed interest in working together. Han understood it too. Right now, he couldn't hunt properly on his own, at least not officially, since the system still labeled him weak. If he truly wanted to grow and land in the right circle, joining Bork's team made far more sense than sticking with Raud. Sure, he dreamed of going solo, but sometimes you start small to reach something big. That's how the guy jokingly called the Sword King ended up in his very first hunter team. Before he could fully process it, Bork was already introducing him to the rest of the squad. Alongside the captain, the team included 2 women and a young but promising mage. It's worth noting that the city of Onpros is infamous for being surrounded by an absurd number of dungeons and dangerous monsters. Almost everything in this city revolves around hunting and monsters, since they're the region's main problem. In the past, monsters rarely left the forest or attacked nearby villages. That changed, and hunters from across the continent flooded into the city to clear the area, secure it, and make money. Bork's team jumped into action immediately, trying to stay ahead of potential rivals. For Han, it was the perfect chance to watch real professionals at work, starting with the captain, always ready to shield his comrades and sacrifice himself if needed. He was the textbook example of a leader people would follow to the edge of the world. Bork wasn't just stacked with combat skill, he also had rare human qualities that set him apart. Even so, in the hardest moments, he still needed the support of someone strong and independent. That pillar had long been Veneta, a high-level fighter with the body of a true athlete. She never hesitated to step in and help during critical moments, no questions asked. On top of that, unspoken romantic tension had burned between them for years, hot enough to survive even the cruelest cold. Alongside these 2 leaders was the captain's younger sister, Erwin. She was young and inexperienced, often getting herself into trouble during raids. Even so, she could always rely on solid backup. Not only her brother stood ready to save her, but also the young mage Hubert, who was progressing fast through relentless training. Together, they formed one of the strongest teams in the city, their reputation spreading across the entire continent. For a newcomer who just arrived in this world, the conditions felt almost perfect. However, while the others fought monsters, Han was assigned to guard the team's belongings. For now, that was the simplest and safest job he was given. None of them had any idea just how insane this guy's true potential really was. While he sat there bored, a large pack of monsters decided to test his skills. The Sword King didn't flinch for a second, calmly accepting the challenge like it was nothing new. He wiped out every monster with ordinary pebbles without even standing up from where he sat. It seemed the local monsters were too weak to push his level forward at all. If he wanted real growth, he'd need far more dangerous opponents. Otherwise, these raids were pointless. After the job was done, the team returned to a small village that served as their base. In this world, even sweet-looking girls casually butchered monster corpses, harvesting organs to sell at the market. That was the hunter lifestyle. Monster bodies were their main source of income. Han did his best to be useful, helping his new companions however he could. In conversation, he admitted he'd lost his home long ago, taken away when he was still a child. Many were shocked to learn he was only 24, since he looked far older. The team tried to comfort someone who had walked through literal hell and told him he was family now. They were kind and welcoming, but even this team had one serious flaw. Hunters prefer not to gamble more than necessary, avoiding dungeons where truly lethal monsters lurk. They feel far more comfortable hunting in the open forest, where the odds of running into instant death stay low. That mindset didn't sit right with the Sword King at all. He'd joined the guild for risk, pain, and real progress. Disappointed, the hunter said he was heading out to train and disappeared into the forest with a dark look on his face. He dashed between the trees, eyes sharp, scanning every shadow in search of something dangerous. Small fry monsters didn't interest him in the slightest. He looked at them the way a kid stares at broken toys. After several hours of pointless searching, Han realized there was nothing here worth his time. Then the forest was torn apart by a thunderous roar like a tiger waking after a long, angry sleep. The monster was clearly massive and vaguely resembled the hell dogs from the Blood Desert. Han launched himself toward the sound without hesitation, greedily dissecting every shadow along the way. He wanted a worthy opponent, a real face-to-face challenge from fate itself. Reaching a forest lake, he stopped, clenched his sword hilt, and his eyes went wide in shock. Instead of a deadly monster, an entirely naked mage stood before him. And for the first time in a long while, Han realized some horrors were better left unfound. The player immediately apologized and hurriedly explained that he was just looking for a monster to train on. Addis stopped him at once, trying to figure out what this meant and why someone had been secretly watching him. The mage didn't seem bothered in the slightest by being completely naked, shamelessly displaying his long magic staff. Han had no desire to get involved and was about to leave, but the mage ignited magical flames and blocked his path. It turned out this guy was insanely talented and had long taken interest in Han, who clearly stood out among hunters. The Sword King had no time for pointless chatter. He wanted real monsters, not weird encounters. With a single motion, he extinguished the magic staff and made it clear that his level 5 was nothing but an illusion. Tension spiked to the limit, and right then, the leader of a local hunter team stepped out of the bushes. All this time, he'd thought Addis was a girl, fooled by the long hair and slender frame. Raud was convinced the newcomer had come to defile a beauty and swore brutal punishment. He drew his sword and prepared for battle, determined to prove that raw muscles alone meant nothing. This hunter had always been confident, and tonight his twin flashing blades thirsted for blood. He lunged forward like a starving hawk diving on prey. Han didn't want unnecessary conflict, so he simply bowed slightly and apologized for the misunderstanding. That alone was enough for his sword hilt to strike with perfect accuracy at every man's weakest point. A titanic burst of energy followed, and screams of pain echoed across the continent. Even hours after sunset, Han still struggled to recover from what had happened. He never wanted enemies. He needed monsters and battles to level up. Instead, he'd accidentally created a mountain of problems and now cursed his own carelessness. Raud was in terrible condition and had to be rushed back to the city for treatment. The healer did everything she could to ease his suffering, even a little. But despite all efforts, Raud permanently lost the 2 magical cores that fueled his energy. For any man, that kind of fate would be a crushing blow. From that day on, Raud's team returned to the city, and their captain cried almost every single day. A full month passed, yet Han still couldn't find any truly strong monsters. Even so, he stayed optimistic and tried to squeeze as much useful information as possible out of evening talks with friends. He learned that local dungeons housed genuinely dangerous creatures, but meeting them required going underground. Almost no information existed since only lunatics dared take that risk. Rumors said the monsters were created by a demon named Anplas, spreading chaos and multiplying slaughter. These creatures appeared deep underground and returned there every night. That was where mysterious artifacts could be found, items capable of pushing a player to a new level. After outsiders and monsters appeared, locals noticed that many objects had begun gaining magical properties. Such artifacts could boost levels, and whispers claimed Raud wanted to cure his condition with one of them. Late at night, after everyone fell asleep, Han quietly dressed and slipped outside with extreme caution. He headed straight for the dark forest, his thoughts locked on magical artifacts. It all sounded like pretty fairy tales to him, and only seeing an artifact firsthand could change his mind. During his night walk through the forest, he did not notice one truly dangerous monster that was sleeping peacefully in the forest. With his non-stop muttering, Han managed to wake the beast, and they ended up scaring the hell out of each other almost instantly. At first, the situation looked borderline ridiculous, until it became clear that Han had finally found exactly what he'd been searching for. For a long time, he'd been tracking high-level monsters, and now his hunt had paid off. All that remained was to hope he wouldn't regret it, because several genuinely lethal creatures stood right in front of him. The monsters quickly closed the circle around him, confident in their numbers and raw power. The problem was that ordinary swords couldn't pierce beasts like these. But for Han, the rules of this world had stopped applying a long time ago. He didn't give a damn about anyone's opinion. He always played by his own rules and never backed down from them. With a completely ordinary sword, he sliced one monster apart, then immediately did the same to its partner without slowing down. The squad leader bolted, trying to save his own skin, but his speed was nowhere near enough. Han caught up in seconds and instantly realized where the runaway was trying to hide. Deep in the forest, a hidden dungeon portal was revealed, the source from which all these monsters had emerged. It was a major secret never meant for human eyes, and the monster had seriously screwed up. Its boss had ordered extreme caution, but regret was pointless now. Han solved two problems at once and gained a clean path into the dungeon. He didn't kill his accidental savior right away, promising to keep the mistake quiet. The monster had no choice but to pretend it heard nothing, saw nothing, and let no one pass. Once deep underground, many inexperienced hunters quickly began to regret their decision. A young squad from the local guild had come down here chasing money, fame, and a big name. Just a few hours later, they were begging for mercy, praying it was all just a nightmare. The dungeon's real danger wasn't only the monsters' strength, but their terrifying numbers. They appeared out of nowhere, attacked from every angle, and left almost no room to maneuver. For young and untested fighters, this place could easily become a mass grave. The squad's mage swung her staff and blinded the advancing monsters with a burst of blinding light. The move worked, buying the humans a brief delay on their own deaths. Still, several team members had already fallen, crushed by non-stop pressure and back attacks. The monsters quickly recovered from the flash and decided to finish the job, already imagining a full meal. It looked like nothing could save the hunters now, and blood was seconds away from flooding the floor. At the last possible moment, everything went off script, like the plot got handed to the people patching Starfield. Fast, unexpected, and with consequences. A violent flash of light forced everyone to tense up, and then it became clear. All the monsters had been instantly decapitated. Hitting the exact weak point on a monster's neck required insane precision and ice-cold focus. Normally, hunters struck lower, forcing monsters to drop their guard and expose the vulnerable zone. That was exactly how the savior of these young fighters operated. The legend of Raud had long spread beyond the city, as he'd been clearing dungeons non-stop for weeks. Everyone believed he was searching for an artifact that could cure his severe health issues. In reality, it was way simpler. Raud got drunk in a tavern and woke up inside a dungeon. Since then, he hadn't been able to find his way out, while the city hailed him as a true hero. Spotting other hunters, Raud chose to team up, hoping they could help him escape. It seemed like a foolproof plan, so he told them to stay close and not fall behind. As soon as they pushed deeper into the dungeon's dark corridors, screams and heavy monster footsteps echoed ahead. The veteran warrior ordered the rookies to hide behind him and vowed to protect them at any cost. He couldn't let his legend collapse, so he did everything possible to maintain the myth of his invincibility. The hunters decided otherwise. A guy grabbed his partner and ran into the nearest passage. They believed their lack of skill would only drag the hero down. In truth, Raud, left alone against the approaching horde, started to panic hard. A massive wave of monsters surged toward him like a living plague. The only mystery left was what could scare these creatures so badly that they ignored a lone hunter. It made no sense. Raud had never seen anything like this during his time in the dungeon. Meanwhile, deep in the dungeon's core, something truly abnormal was unfolding. Piles of torn bodies, rivers of thick blood, and the choking stench of death saturated the air. That was Han, casually using the tornado technique and methodically wiping the entire area clean. Even after wiping out several hundred monsters, Han barely gained any experience points, as if all those battles meant nothing to the system. The system coldly judged his enemies too weak, and decided that this kind of success wasn't worthy of progress. Seeing no other option, he pushed even deeper into a new cave, hoping to finally find something that actually mattered. It was there that the artifacts Bork talked about stopped being rumors and suddenly became real. Deep inside the dungeon lay a mysterious bracelet, capable of firing fireballs and granting the sensation of a true dragon's power. Without a second thought, Han grabbed the bracelet and immediately chose to test it in real combat. He readied himself for battle, feeling magical energy slowly spread through his body, creating an unfamiliar tension. After decades of fighting with a sword, it was time to try magic worthy of a true champion. Han recalled Bork's warning that monsters didn't reproduce but appeared out of nowhere. In every dungeon, there existed a special point where creatures slipped in from another world to spread chaos and death. The moment he tried to activate the artifact, bad news hit almost instantly. The bracelet refused to work. demanding level 31. The legendary artifact turned out to be about as useful as an NFT in 2025. Normally, this wasn't an issue, since only high-level professionals were allowed this deep underground. No one could have imagined a level 5 rookie making it this far. All that remained was to accept reality, sell the useless find, and look for something actually valuable. Moving through yet another cave, Han unexpectedly discovered a hidden underground passage. It was a double dungeon, buried so deep that even the air felt heavy. He was certain this was where the boss lived, the reason this entire sweep had been worth starting. In the central chamber stood a special switch capable of sealing the dungeon completely. Han was about to activate it when slick, disgusting tentacles suddenly wrapped around his arms. That was when he finally encountered a level 45 parasite, the true boss of this dungeon. The monster had clearly waited a long time for an equal opponent and gladly accepted the challenge. This was supposed to be a battle of legends, but the annoying man without magical cores ruined everything again. Raud had also reached this chamber and didn't recognize his greatest enemy at first. Only after looking closer did he realize it was the same rookie who had robbed him of his manhood. From that moment on, there was no turning back, and the monster faded into the background. The team captain challenged the outsider and vowed to take his head immediately. He didn't even notice the dungeon boss anymore, fully locked onto his target. Raud charged forward, ignoring obstacles and lethal danger all around. He wanted to take back what he had lost more than a month ago. Only Han's lightning-fast reaction kept him from taking serious injuries. He slammed into the parasite, enraging the local boss even further. Raud kept attacking in blind fury, refusing to hear any apologies. He had only one goal: to kill the opponent who had always been a simple, kind guy. Blinded by hatred, the hunter captain failed to notice he was becoming a monster himself. The parasite had already wrapped him in tentacles, slowly infecting his body. Then, the creature dragged him closer and completely took over his mind. From that moment on, the monster spoke through Raud, declaring that the dungeon would never be closed. The Sword King had his own plans for the night and wasn't about to abandon them. He had come here for a fight with the strongest monster and accepted the rules without hesitation. In this battle, there was no room left for complex strategies, tense calculations, or clever plot twists. One precise strike was enough to split the monster in half and end its control over the dungeon. To the boss, this felt like a complete anomaly, especially since the opponent was only level 5. Losing to a rookie was humiliating, especially in front of its own servant. The red parasite hastily retreated to report everything to its superior. When the fight ended, Han watched with mild surprise as the system congratulated him on his success. Early the next morning, he hurried back to his team, not wanting to make them worry. Bork was already awake, training hard and preparing for new trials. Only Irvin was deeply anxious, troubled by the fact that Han had vanished again. She feared he might have gotten lost and fallen into the claws of monsters, turning him into an easy and tasty meal. The rookie showed up out of nowhere and casually mentioned that he'd just gone hunting a bit before heading back to the city. He didn't bother explaining what had really happened, even though those adventures would have hooked any listener instantly. As a reward, the system dropped 100,000 experience points on him, his highest gain ever. Even killing the biggest, nastiest helldogs usually earned Han only a few hundred points. He was convinced this would finally skyrocket his level and erase his rookie status for good. Then another system error slammed him straight back to reality. It turned out he still needed more than 50 billion experience points to level up. For several hours, he wandered around with an empty stare, trying to process the number, looking like someone who just checked housing prices in 2025. At times, it even seemed like the guy had completely lost it and might never return to normal reality. Eventually, he snapped out of it and started packing his gear. The hunting season was officially over. Most dangerous monsters had been wiped out, and it was finally safe to return to the city, which had noticeably changed. In the past, hunters entered the city freely, but recently even elite fighters faced strict new rules. The city was almost deserted now, and what once buzzed with life felt disturbingly empty. One familiar knight immediately told Bork this wasn't a joke. The situation was genuinely dire. The forest's main dungeon had been officially cleared, leaving hunters with no work at all. On top of that, an inquisitor from the Holy Church had arrived in the city. The inquisitor was convinced that only an outsider could have cleared the dungeon and launched a ruthless investigation. Most terrified hunters fled to other cities, desperate to avoid suspicion and unnecessary trouble. Rumors spread that the inquisitor tortured even the innocent without hesitation just to extract information. Han felt indirectly responsible for all this, even though he'd never planned anything like it. He had destroyed the dungeon boss but hadn't taken the core or sealed the place. The team felt weighed down by the situation, but the captain still managed to stay optimistic. He insisted they celebrate the rookie's first hunt properly with a real feast that night. For that, Han needed to head to the market and sell all the monster parts collected during the season. He rushed to the nearest shop only to be met with bad news. The local merchant refused to buy the goods. There was simply no one left to resell them to. With almost no hunters remaining, monster trophy trade had lost all value. Only regular food was sellable now. Anything monster-related was completely unwanted. Han tried for a long time to persuade the merchant to buy at least a few fresh trophies. He fell silent when a figure in a dark, terrifying mask stepped into the shop. It was the very Inquisitor everyone feared, and even his presence radiated menace. The merchant went pale, knowing Inquisitors were infamous for cruelty and bloodlust despite their church ties. The Inquisitor walked straight up to the rookie, intent on figuring out what he was hiding. Any outsider could see others' stats, but the Inquisitor's level was completely concealed. Questions fired one after another, yet Han didn't seem shaken in the slightest. He answered calmly, stayed composed, and carried himself like someone with nothing to hide. Once the Inquisitor learned Han was only level 5, his tone immediately softened. Suspecting a mere rookie made no sense. He couldn't be the outsider who cleared the dungeon. With that, the church agent turned to leave, unwilling to waste time on someone so weak. But the moment he turned away, the merchant, thinking the danger had passed, began examining an artifact from the dungeon depths. Through sheer carelessness, the old man dropped the magical bracelet onto the floor, making things far worse. The bracelet rolled straight to the Inquisitor's feet, and of course, he noticed. He knew perfectly well that such artifacts couldn't belong to an ordinary man. Something was off. The Inquisitor approached the rookie again and began telling a strange story filled with heavy implications. Long ago, in a small town, there lived a cheerful, lively hunter with a family and a peaceful life. He hunted with friends and was almost always the heart of the group. One day, they encountered a monster that seemed weak at first glance, but the lead hunter suddenly called off the attack. He convinced his companions the creature was far too dangerous and must not be touched under any circumstances. In the end, the hunter confessed he was an outsider who could see the true level of all living beings. After that revelation, the monster awakened and attacked without warning those who dared stand in its way. While everyone else ran for their lives, the lead hunter stayed behind, fighting the monster in sheer desperation, determined to stall it at any cost. Rumors exploded across the city at terrifying speed, and hiding the truth quickly became impossible. Before long, an Inquisitor arrived and executed everyone even remotely connected to cooperating with an outsider. The outsider himself managed to escape and by some miracle made it back to his home. There, he found his wife and daughter murdered, mercilessly slaughtered by the local townsfolk. His rage burned so fiercely that he erased the entire village, leaving not a single soul alive. That story made one thing painfully clear. This world despised outsiders with absolute hatred. The Inquisitor subtly hinted that Han might be cooperating with someone from another world and helping sell artifacts. He strongly advised against it, warning that everyone tied to such a dark scheme would suffer. Hearing a threat aimed at his team, Han finally snapped. He was ready to crush the Inquisitor's skull and send him straight to hell with one clean punch. Luckily, Addis was there, the same mage who was easily mistaken for a girl. He stepped in at the right moment and claimed that he himself had ordered his assistant to sell the magical artifact. Then Addis loudly scolded Han, putting on a show to make it clear who was supposedly in charge. The performance was flawless. This guy could have won an Oscar without breaking a sweat, easily matching Timothée Chalamet. After that, he turned to the Inquisitor and calmly explained who he really was. Addis Bannister turned out to be a member of a legendary family of dragon hunters. Rumors said almost nothing remained of that bloodline. Its former glory long faded. Even so, Addis was determined to restore his family's name, and he had no intention of breaking the law. That explanation was enough for the Inquisitor, who chose not to detain anyone. Han played along as well, acting like nothing more than an ordinary servant running small errands. The tension noticeably eased, and it felt like the worst had finally passed. There was space to breathe again, to calm the heart that had been pounding out of control. Before leaving, the Inquisitor asked what kind of magical power the artifact generated. The answers didn't match. Han mentioned fireballs, while Addis cautiously hinted at lightning. Those careless words practically signed their death warrants. The Inquisitor instantly activated the entrance seal, cutting off all escape routes. Han's entire short but intense guild career flashed before his eyes. Before this, he had spent decades in total isolation, far away from people. All those years, he'd dreamed of simply talking to someone, and only recently had that wish come true. He'd found a team of friends who stayed by his side and were always ready to help. They never judged him and never demanded sacrifices in return. For the first time in years, Han had eaten something other than hell dog meat, which had long made him sick just thinking about it. Even the simplest meal felt like a luxury beyond measure. He was genuinely happy and had grown truly attached to these people. They looked at him differently, like he'd always belonged with them. Now, with the Inquisitor present, every one of them risked losing their life. The church's agent could erase everyone tied to an outsider, and that couldn't be allowed. All exits were sealed by the tornado technique, making resistance seem pointless. Han stepped forward with confidence, deciding to take control of the situation. He made it clear he didn't want to hurt anyone and was ready to make a deal to spare innocent lives. He admitted that he was the one who cleared the dungeon and was willing to face the consequences. The moment those words landed, the city gates suddenly burst open, followed by a triumphant shout. It was Raud with a group of rookies celebrating loudly and confidently claiming that he had cleared the dungeon himself. Technically, he wasn't wrong. After waking up from the fight, he really had pulled the lever. Later, his friends found him, and the whole group headed home with satisfied smiles. Raud was convinced that glory awaited him, and that his name would finally be written into history. That confidence turned out to be fatal. The Inquisitors mistook him for the outsider, captured him, and dragged him off to distant lands for torture. That guy's luck was catastrophically bad, and it was hard to say which god he had angered so deeply. At that point, Han's words no longer mattered. The Inquisitor had already realized he was just trying to save his friends. He apologized for interfering, cast a brief glance over the gathered crowd, and wished the people of this city good luck. Once everything settled down, it was time to breathe out and have a serious talk with Addis, who had just effectively saved the Sword King. Han knew perfectly well that the story about him just passing by was hard to believe, and this conversation wouldn't be easy. For the rest of the team, returning to the city left a heavy aftertaste that wouldn't fade so quickly. The reason was simple. Almost nothing remained of the guild, and no one could even pay for monster kills anymore. The guildmaster had taken all the shared funds and vanished, meaning the long hunting season ended with nothing but disappointment. Now, the hunters had to survive with just a few silver coins in their pockets and a pile of broken expectations. The only good news was that beer was completely free, and Bork was absolutely hyped about that. He urged his friends not to lose heart and reminded them that work could always be found, even when it felt like the world was ending. Instead of tears and complaints, he suggested celebrating the end of the hunting season and Han's first raid. They quickly cooked dinner, poured cold beer into mugs, and waited for their favorite rookie to return. When the doors swung open, everyone was sure it was him and that the celebration was about to begin. But things went completely off script, and even the ever-smiling Bork lost his trademark grin for a moment. Instead of Han, a long-haired guy stepped into the guild hall wearing a lonely, almost guilty expression. Addis had arrived carrying the belongings Han was supposed to bring back himself. Everyone exchanged tense glances trying to understand what was happening, while the guy nearly buckled under the pressure. He had nowhere near Han's muscle mass, so carrying such heavy loads was clearly too much for him. The mage explained that Han had asked him to return these items, and that was all he said. The hunters' spirits dropped instantly as they realized their friend had likely decided to quit a career he'd only just begun. The strangest part was that every bag was stuffed with gold coins instead of the usual monster parts. There should have been far less money, but the bags looked like Han had accidentally looted the final chest in Roblox and the admin never rolled the server back. The only thing he chose to pass on besides the money was his hunter badge, which he no longer needed. The mage looked at the team with quiet sadness, fully understanding how crushed they felt. The guy who had just become part of their family suddenly chose to leave without explanations or goodbyes. Most likely, it was because of that Inquisitor, who had made it painfully clear he'd kill anyone cooperating with outsiders. Before leaving, the Inquisitor had decided to show something to the mysterious rookie. One glance at that emblem was enough to make Han freeze, swallowing his words like he'd been paralyzed. It was the symbol of Great Earth, the outsider association that had tried to conquer this world years ago. They were destroyed by 4 heroes, and ever since, everyone believed Great Earth would never rise again. Han pretended he didn't understand what this was about and simply wanted to leave as fast as possible. The Inquisitor felt that the rookie didn't seem like an outsider, yet deep down sensed a strange pressure around him. He warned that if Han did turn out to be an outsider, all his friends would die brutal deaths. Those words were enough for Han to decide, once and for all, to leave the team and walk the path of a loner. Making that choice was agonizing, especially since he'd only just felt like he finally had a family. Now everything had to start over, and this harsh world clearly wasn't about to cut him any slack. Wandering through the city, the player ran into local bandits and quickly learned how things really worked here. Meanwhile, his friends were racking their brains, trying to understand the real reason behind his actions. Some called him a self-absorbed egoist, while others genuinely tried to figure out why he'd done this. The captain calmed everyone down, saying Han was simply tired of the hunter life and needed a break. He reminded them that Han had sent them a massive amount of money, and that alone deserved gratitude. No matter what happened, Han could always come back, knowing there were people here who truly cared about him. Several hours later, the main character was jolted awake by a splash of icy water. It was the same bandits he'd clashed with earlier on the city streets. Towering over him stood a massive bald brute, one of the gang's bosses. The man demanded answers, and Han calmly replied that he hadn't touched anyone. The bandits tried to beat him down, but immediately injured their own arms and legs because this guy was tougher than stone. No matter what he said, no one listened, and eventually the bald brute lost his patience. He decided to personally test how strong the rookie's jaw was and threw a crushing punch. The result shocked everyone. Han didn't feel a thing, while the bald brute shattered every finger in his hand. An angry crowd of bandits quickly gathered around, trying to figure out what to do with this strange newcomer. Some of them seriously suggested burning him at the stake and getting rid of the body, just to avoid attention and unnecessary trouble. At that moment, a calm yet firm voice cut through the noise. The voice of a seasoned man everyone around clearly saw as the real boss. He studied Han closely and asked a few probing questions, which the rookie deliberately avoided answering directly. From the boy's posture and eyes alone, the old man immediately understood he was someone who had survived the Rocky Mountains. That was the absolute truth, and Han was genuinely shocked that the old man even knew about his origin. The boss said that if Han wanted real answers, he'd have to join his company and work there for at least a few months. Han had no choice left. He'd walked away from his team, and the guild had been completely wiped out. To avoid ending up broke, he agreed to cooperate and soon realized these weren't ordinary bandits at all. It turned out most of them worked for an architectural company closely tied to real estate. At first glance, everything looked brutal and inhuman. These people came in and took houses away from the poor. One day, a father returned after a long search for work and tried to protect his wife and child. He waved a sword and shouted that he was ready to go all in just to keep his home. No one listened, and soon a man known as the Rock stepped forward. He was so massive and intimidating that simply standing near him felt uncomfortable. No matter how hard the young father tried to stop him, Han showed zero fear of the sharp blade. He looked at everyone around him like ants, creatures incapable of frightening a real tiger. Taking a few steps forward, he swung once and obliterated the massive house with a single crushing blow. At first, it looked heartless, but within days, it became clear things weren't that simple. After demolishing the old houses, the architectural company began building new modern structures. Young families finally got a chance to forget leaking roofs, freezing winters, and damp late autumns. No one knew where the company got its money or what its true goal was, but many people received new homes because of it. Once the work was done, Han immediately headed to meet the old man. Lately, inquisitors kept haunting his thoughts, making him nervous and overly cautious. A lot of time had passed since he started working, and his desire to learn the truth about the Rocky Mountains only grew stronger. The old man was clearly hiding something, and things couldn't go on like this. Han desperately wanted to understand his origins and find out if returning home was even possible. Still, he avoided admitting he was an outsider, instead speaking loudly and arguing like an unhinged madman. The boss calmly listened to every emotional rant, sitting steadily in his chair. He had known for a long time that Han came from another world and had no intention of exposing him. No matter how hard Han tried to hide it, experienced people could see the truth easily. The old man knew many ended up here after the Rocky Mountains. He had met hunters like that before. Long ago, this world was different. Outsiders and locals lived peacefully and even became friends. Everything changed when the hunter profession appeared and outsiders slowly lost their sanity. The old man chose not to reveal every secret, as if giving the boy a chance to uncover this world on his own. The only thing he truly wanted was for a long-awaited reunion between friends to finally happen. It turned out Addis had recently gone searching for a lost friend and discovered where he worked. After long talks with the old man, he managed to arrange a meeting with the Sword King. The moment he saw his old friend, he lit up with joy, like a long-lost relative reunited at last. Han suddenly realized the mask hiding his face was concealing his true self, and that it was the dumbest idea he'd ever had. The real estate construction work was nearing completion, and the old man had no more tasks for Han. He was ready to send him into a kind of early retirement, asking only one thing, that Han never return to being a hunter. Outsiders couldn't handle that life. It drove them insane and turned them into mass killers. Only a calm life without constant danger allowed one to stay hidden, like an unseen chameleon. At the very end, Addis decided to tell the story of how he met the Sword King, and that turned out to be a huge mistake. It became painfully clear the mage had zero talent for storytelling and always left out critical details. He explained that they met while he was completely naked, and Han decided to save him from a monster. The old man immediately tensed up, vividly imagining the scene in his head. Then the mage added that Han had abandoned him, somehow making it all even weirder. The old man listened, turned pale, called them both perverts, and kicked them out, like a strict grandpa who accidentally opened TikTok and saw way too much. He had always stood by conservative values and absolutely hated all this new age nonsense. So, just moments later, he kicked the two clueless idiots out and made it clear he never wanted to see them again. Addis had to apologize for his behavior and swear he'd never tell stories like that again. He hadn't been looking for Han for no reason. There really was a job waiting for him. The mage needed to head into the nearby forest to carry out a full survey of the area. To feel more confident and at ease, he decided to bring along an old friend. Han had no other offers on the table, so he agreed without overthinking it. Lately, he hadn't been able to level up at all, since the local monsters were clearly weaker than him. During the survey, the mage kept activating his magical artifact non-stop. He burned everything in his path with reckless ease, like it was all just a game to him. Addis never explained this behavior, acting as if he wanted to scorch the entire green forest to ash. At the same time, he insisted he had things under control and always put the fire out once he confirmed no monsters were nearby. During these long walks, they talked a lot, and the mage slowly began opening up about his past. He explained that almost no one hunted dragons anymore, since those creatures had nearly vanished. Even if someone did manage to find a dragon, hunting it would be nothing short of suicidal. A single flap of a dragon's wings could wipe a human out, so it was better not to try at all. In one of these talks, Addis admitted he wanted to form his own hunter team. Han would be his first ally if he agreed to work together. It was obvious the Sword King trusted no one and feared his secret might be exposed. At the same time, he knew perfectly well that without progress, he'd never earn an audience with a goddess. All that remained was to decide whether he could trust the red-haired guy with the bizarre magic. Right then, the conversation suddenly turned tense, even though everything had been calm a second earlier. Addis abruptly grabbed his magic staff and aimed it straight at his friend. There was no way to tell whether it was a sudden lapse of sanity or a deliberate attempt at murder. Only at the last instant did Han dodge, immediately realizing his friend was actually protecting him. A precise magical strike obliterated a kobold that had been patiently waiting for the perfect moment to attack. It was strange, since creatures like that usually hunted inside dungeons. At best, they came out at night, but never attacked in broad daylight. When they cut open the monster's belly, they found a half-eaten human finger inside. It became clear that an entire kobold tribe was hiding nearby, and all they had to do was wait for nightfall to start the hunt. Just north of the forest stood an abandoned village, completely overrun by monsters. That was unusual, since such creatures normally lived deep underground. After Raud sealed one of the dungeons, everyone believed there were no serious threats left in the area. Looking closer, the mage spotted a suspended human who seemed to still be alive. He immediately wanted to rush in, but Han stopped him. He insisted on caution, suggesting they scout the area first before taking action. A few minutes later, once preparations were complete, they attacked without any warning. Addis used his old, reliable technique known as the Monostone spell. He launched stones that automatically exploded upon hitting their targets. It was simple and effective. There was no need for close combat to wipe out monsters. At first glance, Addis might seem cautious or even a little timid, but in a critical moment, he instantly turned into someone unstoppable. Within minutes, the entire village was engulfed in flames, monsters screaming and scattering in panic. There were no humans left inside. Those unfortunate souls had been eaten long ago. The final victim had been hung up as bait for inexperienced hunters, luring them into a trap. The strategy wasn't bad, but the monsters failed to account for running into well-prepared and extremely powerful fighters. Using fire magic, Addis handled every threat with ease and didn't even break a sweat. He blew everything up with the kind of joy you'd expect from someone who found a nuclear launch button and decided to test it with no moderation. When the flames finally died down, they calmly walked the perimeter to assess what had happened. Hunter badges were found everywhere, belonging to people who died months ago. It was clear that all of them had fallen to the monsters, one by one, without a chance. After a short but careful investigation, it became clear that an active portal was hidden right inside the local well. No one could have imagined that another dungeon existed in this region, so carefully concealed from sight. Now it was obvious where the extra wave of monsters had come from, but one critical question still had no answer. Someone had deliberately opened this portal, and that required serious skill and confident control over dark magic. An ordinary monster couldn't pull that off. This was the work of a true professional of the dark arts. Lost in thought, the hunters didn't even notice danger creeping up behind them. The air around them slowly began to freeze, as if an Ice King had decided to personally announce his presence. A skeleton named Lich appeared before them, and it was obvious he wasn't here on friendly business. A level 72 monster like this could easily become the greatest threat Han had ever faced. This skeleton was a straight-up psycho. He could smell fear and instantly got hyped by it. The moment he sensed even a flicker of terror, his stats spiked hard, making him twice as dangerous. He made it clear right away that no one was escaping, since everything unfolding was part of a carefully planned trap. He was the one who released the dungeon monsters to lure wandering hunters to this place. The mage's fire attacks didn't scare him at all. The Lich had long since mastered the element of cold. Using his crystals, he could chill even volcanic lava, let alone ordinary magical flames. To buy at least a little time, Addis decided to fall back on an old, reliable trick. He struck the skeleton with a mana stone, and after the explosion, retreated with his friend to a safer distance. A plan was needed immediately because a direct clash meant guaranteed death. Everything seemed calm on the surface, but the crushing sense of an incoming catastrophe wouldn't let Han relax. He realized something was wrong when he felt an icy wind right at his back. At the last second, he grabbed his friend by the arm and yanked him to a stop. An icy prison instantly formed around them, trapping them inside a magical sphere. The hunters were caught, and any plans of a safe retreat could be thrown straight into the trash. Fire techniques stopped working. The temperature was far too low for flames to show their true power. While Addis desperately tried to melt the ice, the Sword King prepared to face the skeleton head-on. He had long mastered the slaughter of helldogs, but fighting a spellcaster was a whole new game. The Lich immediately unleashed freezing winds, cooling the fury of the otherworldly mercenary. Despite all his experience, Addis froze for a moment, like a child crushed by pressure. His earlier enthusiasm vanished, replaced by doubt and raw fear. Even so, with the last of his strength, he called out to his friend and begged him to run the moment a chance appeared. At first, Han didn't understand what was happening, but then he carefully watched the mage's movements. Using his fire clones, Addis deliberately wounded himself, forcing fireball magic directly into his bloodstream. When the skill finally activated, his veins glowed red, as if they were about to erupt in flames. That was how Addis overcame the cold inside his body and earned a real chance to fight. He asked Han to trust him and promised to handle the skeleton alone. Han had no idea how to approach a monster this dangerous, so he pulled back and watched the more experienced fighter. The Lich was clearly enjoying the moment, in no rush to kill his captives, savoring the tension. First, Addis performed a simple distraction, nothing special at a glance. He tossed his magic staff, which exploded a few seconds later, and diverted the skeleton's attention. While the Lich tried to process what had just happened, his opponent began to change rapidly. Internal energy flows restructured themselves, something even the skeleton noticed through thermal sensing. In that instant, he realized he was about to experience emotions he never signed up for. The shy, quiet mage transformed within minutes into a massive dragon, like that one classmate everyone laughed at, who suddenly became a millionaire and vanished from the chat. Han understood immediately, memories of that night in the forest flashing back. Back then, he'd run toward a monster's roar, never realizing that monster was his friend. Now it was clear why Addis had been completely naked. Just minutes earlier, he'd turned into a dragon. There was no time for explanations. Action had to be fast, brutal, and without compromise. The dragon took the Lich head-on and ordered Han to wait until it was over. Han watched Addis without fear. Hell dogs from his past had been far bigger than this dragon. The icy prison suppressed the dragon's firepower, preventing him from unleashing his full potential. No matter how hard he tried to turn the area into a burning hellscape, the cold refused to give way. At one point, the dragon's inner core finally stored enough energy for a decisive strike. It was an explosion of pure rage driven by a single purpose: to erase the enemy. Facing that kind of force head-on meant suicide, so the Lich calmly dodged instead. He moved with precision and flexibility, always positioning himself to avoid being caught off guard. The cold kept intensifying, and time was clearly working against the dragon. Victory demanded non-stop pressure, attacks without pause, leaving the enemy no room to breathe. The Lich could feel it perfectly. The dragon's magic was slowly running dry. He deliberately dragged the fight deeper into his own element, forcing the dragon to burn through every drop of firepower. To the skeleton, it all felt like entertainment. He barely even tried while deflecting the attacks. When even the strongest blows failed to deal damage, the dragon chose to change tactics. He redirected the raging flames and blasted a breach into the icy prison. There was only one goal: to give Han a chance to escape while the dragon held the skeleton back. The Sword King didn't want to abandon his friend and stayed by his side until the very last second. Only later did he realize survival required retreating alone, without giving the Lich a chance to pursue. As Han neared the exit, countless ice crystals instantly formed in the air. They looked like a crocodile's razor teeth, ready to turn a human into shredded meat on command. For the first time, the outsider hesitated, realizing his new life had gone completely off the rails. The old man had warned him to stay unnoticed and forget the hunter path, and now it was painfully clear he'd been right. One thing became obvious: death was right there and only a miracle could save him. Just as Han braced for the end, he felt warm blood splash across his arms and legs, and it wasn't his. For a moment he froze, looked up, and realized his friend had sacrificed himself to save him. That instant sealed their bond forever. After something like that, Addis could never again be seen as a stranger. Even the skeleton was stunned by the act, his twisted amusement faltering for a brief moment. Seconds later, Han fully grasped what had happened and shouted, trying to snap the dragon back to consciousness. Addis's regeneration reserves were massive, and if left alone, he would recover without question. All it would take was a bit of magical elixir, and he'd shine again like before. But for Addis to have even the slightest chance to live, the skeleton's next attacks had to be stopped. Han had no choice but to step in himself and face the demon that had appeared out of nowhere. By then, the Lich had dropped all amusement and decided to end the battle as fast as possible. His legendary giant punishing ice sword technique was ready to test the defenses of both hunter and dragon. As a final offer, he gave the dragon a chance to survive, abandon the humans and join the monsters. Addis rejected it with a faint smirk. He'd chosen humanity long ago. At that moment, a slight smile crossed Han's face. Knowing his friend was still there mattered more than anything. Then the blow of fate came crashing down, nearly impossible to stop. For Han, it didn't matter anymore. He was ready to meet the attack head-on. Even without magic capable of killing the skeleton, he could still make things very painful. The guy everyone saw as a weak level 5 was about to show what he was really made of. Pushing off the ground, he shot upward, shining like the brightest star in the galaxy. Watching his movement was pure spectacle, fast yet powerful, like a charging bison. Despite the mountain of muscle, his flexibility was unreal. That was what allowed him to land unpredictable strikes no opponent could adapt to in time. The skeleton mocked him right up until it felt its skull shatter into countless fragments. One blow was enough to crush the icy attack and instantly seize control of the fight. The shockwave was so intense that even the frozen dome couldn't withstand the pressure. The ice prison technique was obliterated in mere seconds. When Addis had tried the same thing, he failed, and now the gap in power between him and the Sword King was undeniable. Even Han himself was slightly stunned, not expecting such devastating results. Even the dragon began questioning his friend's true level. Those were not rookie skills. The outsider had to improvise an excuse, claiming he was just a lucky guy who sometimes pulled off the impossible. A classic story straight out of a crypto influencer's playbook right before the exchange collapses. The skeleton shattered into tiny fragments and needed several minutes just to regain awareness after the impact. But destroying a monster like that took more than raw strength. Magic and high-tier skills were mandatory. The Lich triggered regeneration and, to buy time, summoned kraken-like tentacles as backup. He was clearly trying to clap back after the humiliation, and the lethal aura pouring off him said everything. No more games, no more fun. This time he meant to punish his enemies the hard way. The Sword King welcomed the challenge, flexing muscles powerful enough to wreck the composure of supermodels on any beach. Every skeleton technique failed, and whatever worked before no longer mattered. He had run into the true executioner of this world, someone ready to snap the rules and rewrite reality. It wasn't hard to guess that the skeleton had originally been an outsider from Earth. Once his life had meant nothing, then he was chosen and granted a second shot in a new world. Everything went smooth, he felt strong and untouchable, until he collapsed like a house of cards. The moment he believed death was beaten, fate yanked him straight back to the ground. As Han delivered killing blows, the dragon struggled to understand how he'd missed the rookie's real strength for so long. This guy could stand his ground, and not even an immortal skeleton could change that. The Lich healed again and again, but every clash ended the same way. While ice techniques failed, the Sword King needed only one hit to tear the enemy apart. By now, Han fully realized the skeleton wasn't a native monster, but an outsider like himself. From that moment on, the Lich's fate was sealed, no matter how hard he resisted. Confidence dissolved into sticky fear, and the skeleton tried to run like a cornered, terrified dog. Too many people had suffered because of beings like him, turning his existence into a curse. This skeleton cast a shadow over all outsiders, and for that, a brutal and public punishment awaited. No matter how desperately he clung to life, activating the ice puppet technique only delayed the inevitable. Han sliced through frozen monsters with terrifying ease, like a hot blade through soft butter. He smashed his enemy's teeth again and again, dark satisfaction clear in his eyes. He'd felt that same sensation only once before, when he killed the hell dog that destroyed his home. But total victory required aura, and that technique was still beyond his reach. The skeleton's body was pure mana, and disrupting its flow would shatter all magic. In theory, it sounded simple, but in reality, it demanded a completely different tier of power. The skeleton clung to a false sense of invincibility, regenerating and restarting the fight over and over. Realizing his enemy couldn't use aura, he gambled everything on one final charge. It was the desperate move of a loser trying to re-enter the race and prove he still mattered. He gathered every drop of internal energy and unleashed a deadly technique, draining himself dry. Recovery would take ages after that, but he was sure the hunter would die. The entire area exploded with monstrous force, turning night into day. Addis could only squeeze his eyes shut and pray, fists clenched in helplessness. He expected icy death, but instead felt a light wind of freedom. Opening his eyes, he realized it was now Han's turn to save him. No sacrifice was needed. One sword swing and a lifted stone were enough to defend them. Aura was the orthodox path to victory, but sometimes there was a shorter, far riskier road. Han chose that path, proving even an immortal warrior's aura didn't scare him. He pushed through torrents of icy mana and closed in to finish it. The sword once mocked now cleaved energy itself, completely ignoring magic. In that instant, a legend began to form, one capable of flipping this entire world. The Lich was done, his final defense cracking, like Donald Trump's patience the moment he realized Greenland was never happening. Han grabbed the enemy by the neck and stared straight into empty eye sockets. A smile crossed his face, revealing the true nature of a man who'd crossed the line long ago. The skeleton looked helpless, believing for the first time that his immortality was gone. Agony consumed his body as he struggled with his last strength against death. Watching it was almost ironic. The ice techniques had long proven completely useless. No matter how hard he tried to escape, it was impossible. Han had already taken his bony legs. The Lich was now completely under his control and had no choice but to reveal every single piece of information he possessed. At that point, it really would have been wise to keep kids away from the screen, because what followed turned into a raw and terrifying descent into true madness. Han grabbed the skeleton's bony legs and began methodically grinding them down with his blade, forcing the Lich to endure unbearable pain. The skeleton screamed, cried, and begged for it to stop, but those sounds only fueled the cold insanity burning in Han's eyes. Only hours later did it finally end, and the mutilated scene sank into an eerie, suffocating silence. The wounded dragon came to when he felt a cold, burning, sticky liquid being poured over his body. It turned out to be a recovery potion Han had been carrying in his backpack for emergencies. He quickly found several vials, carefully opened them, and used the potion to restore his friend's health. Han calmly explained that the skeleton was no longer a problem, since it could now be considered a completely neutralized cripple. The legless outsider couldn't escape anywhere, and only whimpered softly, writhing pitifully like a wounded duck. The moment for a serious conversation arrived. They needed to find out who he worked for and what his organization was after. Han was ready to erase the enemy on the spot, but the skeleton's upper body turned out to be unexpectedly durable. Addis decided to finish what had been started and stepped toward the defeated enemy, fury blazing in his eyes. He was prepared to use magic and erase the skeleton completely if the truth wasn't revealed immediately. Refusing to betray his allies, the Lich chose to trigger self-destruction, using the remnants of his own mana. As he tried to end himself, a golden coin fell from his pocket, impossible to miss. Han instantly picked it up, his eyes widening as if the full scale of the conspiracy had just been laid bare. In that instant, he realized the skeleton had been cooperating with a corporation known as Great Earth. It turned out these hostile outsiders were stockpiling power for one reason only: to destroy a world they openly despised. Right before dying, the skeleton promised their plan would be completed, and that stopping them was already impossible. His presence was so ominous that the two hunters barely dared to move, like employees at a corporate party when the CEO suddenly shows up and everyone remembers their KPIs. Then came a massive explosion that shook the earth, leaving nature itself struggling to recover. Now, it was time to return to the cave in the northern forest where events were unfolding in parallel. A dragon named Afir lived there, and lately he had begun packing up and searching for a new home. Circumstances kept getting worse, and the world itself seemed to hint that something truly horrific was approaching. Afir didn't want to leave his beloved cave, but everything happening made it clear he no longer had a choice. It all began when an unknown mage started mercilessly burning the surrounding forest, leaving nothing alive. Then sudden frost struck, and massive glaciers nearly destroyed the dragon's cave itself. Just when Afir thought things had finally stabilized, a strange explosion hit, triggering a real earthquake. Most likely, all of this was connected to the dragon helping an outsider and angering the gods in the process. Unwilling to gamble with his own life, Afir decided to pack up and search for a new place to live. At that moment, a male voice rang out, instantly catching his attention. It turned out a hunter was nearby, hoping to speak with the kind and peaceful wyvern. He asked not to be feared and explained that he was looking for a lost friend who hadn't been in contact for a long time. According to him, that friend looked rather strange, almost like a skeleton. As he said this, the hunter slowly reached for his sword, clearly signaling how things might end. Just a moment before the blast, the skeleton's teeth flared with bright blue light, foreshadowing disaster. Addis panicked first. He instantly understood what was coming and yelled for his friend to run. He tried to take control of the situation and neutralize the threat, but his mana reserves drained at terrifying speed. The dragon lost consciousness, finally losing hope of saving both himself and his friend. Seconds later, an explosion tore through the area, leaving behind a gigantic crater, as if a meteor had struck. When mysterious mercenaries arrived at the site, they struggled to understand what had happened there. The aggressive, overly emotional girl was named Leslie. She'd long walked the path of banditry and shady deals. The man working with her was Richard, and by tracing mana residue, he realized heavy magic had been used here. His intuition told him this was the place where one of their allies, the Lich, had perished. That man had deliberately turned himself into a skeleton to never die again, making his self-destruction painfully ironic. Soon, Alejandro approached Leslie, as usual managing to ruin the mood just by showing up. He constantly harassed her and clearly had no concept of personal boundaries or basic decency. Sometimes a knife had to come out to make it crystal clear that continuing like that would end very painfully. Once again, Richard had to step in to calm the two down before they started yet another fight. During the battle, one of their operatives was killed, and after that, it was clearly no time for jokes. Richard understood almost everything, but one detail of that fight kept bothering him. A battle had clearly taken place nearby, raising the obvious question of why the skeleton chose to self-destruct right there. It felt as if someone had deliberately moved him to that spot, and that someone possessed terrifying, overwhelming power. In reality, everything was decided by an ordinary guy from Earth who sent the skeleton's head flying with a single kick, like a soccer ball. No VAR, no appeals, no rematch. When Addis lost consciousness, his friend panicked and spent several long seconds unable to figure out what to do next. The explosion could have happened at any moment, so Hayne didn't hesitate and simply hurled the skeleton's head as far away as possible. Right after that, he picked up his friend and rushed him back to the city for urgent recovery. He immediately went to the old man for help, but when the old man saw Han show up again with a naked Atis, he nearly kicked them out, once again labeling them perverts out of habit. Only later did he calm down and finally agree to help, so Addis ended up in the local hospital. Now there were almost no secrets left between them, and the dragon fully understood that his friend was truly an outsider. Yet even with a mission to kill a continent's goddess, Han still dreamed of a quiet life and trying to fit into this world. He wanted to be an outsider who didn't kill people and lived within the law. He knew that sooner or later, most outsiders snapped, started killing, and slowly lost their minds. That path scared him more than anything, so he tried to act with maximum caution. Han understood that dealing with other outsiders was dangerous. Any one of them could break someday and choose a blood-soaked road. That was why he decided to continue his journey alone, without putting his friends at unnecessary risk. He said goodbye to Addis and explained that he was moving to a completely different city. It was an honest confession, like finally letting out everything he had kept bottled up for so long. Addis responded in kind and admitted that his real surname was completely different. He had been created by the great goddess of shadows to become a dragon's descendant, and dragons were known for always paying their debts, meaning Addis would be forever indebted to his friend. Han simply smiled calmly and walked out, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. They parted without realizing just how tightly their fates were intertwined. That same evening, Han packed his belongings and prepared for a new journey. The old man did everything he could to support the young outsider and even gave him some gold. He sternly asked him to be careful, hide his identity, and never kill anyone. Commit even a single murder, and there would be no road back. Han took those words seriously, even though he still didn't fully understand how one killing could turn a person into a monster. He promised to return someday, said goodbye to the old man, and left in an unknown direction. Left alone, the old man looked up at the sky and began praying to the goddess for the fate of the kind outsider. Meanwhile, the beautiful wyvern named Afir had completely forgotten what true freedom felt like. Now, she was forced to obey human orders, unable to even dream of a new home. At the scene, blood belonging to a 500-year-old dragon was discovered. The mercenaries decided to use it to track down Addis and take revenge for the skeleton's death. They planned to rely on the wyvern's help, since she could locate another dragon using nothing but the scent of blood. At the same time, a lonely carriage rolled slowly through a bright forest already infested with bandits and cutthroats. These people made a living through robbery and felt zero remorse about it. Fate is rarely kind to types like that, and today was exactly one of those days. Easy prey suddenly turned into a full-blown nightmare, like quick money from a $999 info course. Instead of profit, they ran into a man whose muscles were tougher than any rope. Most of the mercenaries managed to flee, but their leader stayed behind and almost instantly regretted it. Kalanor took several brutal hits and was eventually forced to work as Han's carriage driver. The outsider immediately warned him that any attempt to escape or deceive would be punished with maximum severity. He ordered the criminal to show the road to a city that could open new opportunities for him. Nearby stood the well-known city of I-10, close to which lay a massive dungeon. The Crater Valley dungeon attracted crowds of tourists and hunters despite the risk to life. Monsters rarely emerged outside, so the locals felt relatively safe. Too many carriages had gathered ahead, forcing them to stop for a while. Kalanor decided this was his last chance to escape and tried to seize the moment. He thought he could outrun fate itself, but Han had zero intention of letting him walk away that easily. The criminal cracked under the pressure, burst into tears, dropped to his knees, and begged for a second chance. He honestly confessed that the city housed a massive prison known to every thug on the continent. The place was packed with real monsters, and a weakling like Kalanor wouldn't survive there for more than a few days. Those creatures would tear him apart, and according to rumors, that wasn't even the worst part. People whispered that a terrifying outsider had recently been thrown in there, someone every local brute feared. Hearing about another outsider instantly caught Han's attention. He'd always been curious about meeting fellow Earthlings. At that moment, a local guard noticed the strange scene and decided to check what was going on. Kalanor was already imagining himself being dragged to prison, but his savior suddenly showed mercy. Han handed him a bag of money and gave him a chance to start a new life from scratch. For a brief moment, he truly felt like a benefactor, doing the right thing and helping someone in need. Seconds later, while checking his own supplies, he realized something had gone terribly wrong. He'd mixed up the bags and handed the bandit the gold, keeping only copper for himself, exactly like trying to buy a skin and accidentally one-click donating everything. It was a total disaster, and of course, by then, Kalanor had already vanished. Once inside the city, the Sword King immediately started looking for any kind of work. He was almost broke, and the situation looked downright grim. There was no other option. He'd have to go back to the guild and find a job. In this city, tourists were spotted fast and just as quickly offered all kinds of side work. In the crowd, a guy with bright red hair stood out instantly. Han grabbed his friend on reflex and bolted away like a hurricane trying to erase its own tracks. Once they reached a relatively safe spot, a brutal interrogation began to figure out what was actually going on. The last agreement had been to go separate ways, but Addis clearly had a different plan. Instead of staying in his home city, he'd come here in advance and waited for his friend. It was all part of a scheme he'd arranged together with the old man, preparing this reunion ahead of time. The ancient dragon wanted Han to join his team, convinced that such an alliance was perfect. Right now, Han couldn't meet the goddess anyway, and he still needed to level up to pass the trial and return to Earth. A bit frustrated, he wandered through the house and suddenly noticed a refrigerator. Until that moment, he'd been convinced this world had none of the human tech he'd been craving. Back in the Rocky Mountains, he'd constantly dreamed of cold beer to numb the pain inside. And now it felt like life was finally improving, like all his problems were fading away. Then the system dropped the warning. Unlock required level 10, turning a fridge into a premium feature like it was a subscription, not food. Han completely lost it and started cursing every god who'd ever thought these rules were a good idea. It became obvious that everything here revolved around levels, and teaming up with Addis was the only way forward. On top of that, the dragon already had a clear plan for building a successful hunter career. The very next morning, they headed to the local guild, packed with mercenaries from across the continent. A massive, heavily built guy instantly drew everyone's attention. All eyes locked onto him, trying to figure out what kind of monster he even was. The young female administrators immediately fell for the handsome red-haired man. They didn't hide their excitement. He looked like an angel who descended straight from the heavens. Standing nearby, though, was a gloomy, hostile-looking guy nobody seemed happy to see. Han had changed his image, gotten a tan, and completely ditched his old uniform. People wondered where he came from and how they were even supposed to react to that look. He looked as dark and intimidating as possible, not even considering a joke or a smile. When asked to take the test on the measuring stone, he didn't bother hiding his aggression. In Han's view, that stone was a prank by malicious gods, and he refused to play by their rules. He shattered the stone with a single hand movement, like Apple removing chargers and pretending it was always the plan. No one there had ever seen anything like it, and he instantly drew the attention of even the most seasoned adventurers. Just as everyone was ready to demand explanations, Addis stepped in. He introduced his friend and announced that a legendary warrior named Volterra had joined the guild today. The day before, they'd already agreed to invent a legend about Han's unbelievable qualities. It was crucial to explain his origins properly, so not a single person would even think of calling him an outsider. If Han was presented as a legendary warrior, then his strange and terrifying abilities would stop raising eyebrows. The warriors of Volterra were known for inhuman strength, sunburned bodies, and an almost complete lack of clothing. According to the legend, Han was born in their settlement and had now set out on a journey across the world. His first step was to ditch the t-shirt and get used to spending long hours under the open sun. He openly hated the idea, but Addis was convinced the plan would work flawlessly. People around them were genuinely intrigued, some even claiming they'd heard of such warriors from distant tribes. According to Addis, they worked together and followed orders from a dragon organization. Han was his personal bodyguard, so they were always side by side, acting as a single unit. When Addis was asked to show documents, he casually said he'd left them at home. His charming smile and natural charisma turned that lie into a believable story. After that, no one asked unnecessary questions, especially with girls nearby dreaming of a date with him. The Volterra warrior also drew massive attention, as many wanted to recruit him into their teams. He was flooded with offers of cooperation, promising big money and sweet conditions. Turning them down wasn't easy, but it was necessary to reach their real goals. Neither of the two friends suspected that those hunting them were already inside the city's dungeon. Richard arrived at Alejandro's headquarters together with his assistant. Alejandro, as usual, talked nonstop, acting overly confident and arrogant. He had long cooperated with the Dragon Association and was genuinely shocked to learn the skeleton had been killed by one of their own kind. Most likely, it was a traitor within the association and he needed to be found and eliminated fast. Richard promised the hunt for the dragon would continue in the near future. After that, the conversation took a sharp turn, and Alejandro decided to put on the show everyone had gathered for. A stage appeared out of nowhere, reeking of blood mixed with the scent of fresh wood. The mercenaries turned their heads with interest and stared intently in that direction. On the stage stood the same wyvern named Ifir, and beside her was a guy who looked like a zombie. He had been promised complete freedom if he finished the job and followed every order. A strange badge hung from his neck, and just looking at it sent chills down the spine. The moment Leslie saw that symbol, she tensed up, It was an experiment she believed long abandoned. It turned out such research was still ongoing in sealed laboratories. Richard didn't even blink, as if nothing in this world could surprise him anymore. The wyvern looked broken and cried constantly, clearly longing for her home. During her short time in captivity, she had met a young girl who looked like a princess from a children's cartoon. The girl held 2 sharp swords, as if she'd stepped onto the stage for a fight to the death. The zombie-like man quickly gave in to his instincts, feeling like a true blood-hungry monster. Alejandro gave the signal to start the game and prepared to enjoy the spectacle. At first, the atmosphere was deceptively calm. Everyone fell silent, waiting. The man and the girl on the stage were outsiders and could clearly see each other's levels. Long ago, this guy had been a cheerful and handsome hunter until he started killing people. Over time, he turned into a deranged psychopath no one could stop. As he tried to tear the small girl apart, Afir watched in horror, desperately trying to figure out what to do. She was terrified and had no idea how to break free. Watching it all unfold, Afir couldn't believe her once happy life had ended like this. The 2 outsiders clashed, but only the girl named Ellie wielded weapons. The man fought barehanded, as if that alone was more than enough. His behavior was overly aggressive, so his hair was cut quickly and without ceremony, making it clear this wasn't a game. Losing his hair only enraged him further, and he decided to show everyone why they were here. Experiments on outsiders were conducted under extreme secrecy, known only to a select few. It was once believed the method didn't work, but Alejandro chose to revive the transformation technology. It allowed an ordinary human to turn into a monster and become twice as dangerous. Leslie had never seen anything like it before, and her reaction spoke louder than words. Despite the monster's collapse, the blind girl Ellie didn't even consider fear or retreat. She calmly waited for the distance to close, caught the ripple of her opponent's mana, and in the same instant, struck with surgical precision, using both blades. The paralyzed monster slammed into the floor and stayed lifeless for several seconds, like someone had hard-powered it off. After that, Don Alejandro allowed his assistant to finish the show and put a final stamp on it. One clean sword strike was enough to freeze the dead man's blood forever. Afir watched all of this closely, unable to hide her genuine shock. The wyvern had been certain the blind girl was fully loyal to these horrifying people and long absorbed into their system. Meanwhile, Richard showed little emotion and calmly indicated that it was time for him and Leslie to leave. They agreed to continue hunting the dragon who destroyed the skeleton and to make sure something like this never happened again. There were also fragments of talk about some kind of dragon core, but the words were scattered and hard to catch. Aethir tried to stay focused, yet much of what she heard made no sense to her. The core idea was clear enough. These were people from the Great Earth Organization, and they intended to take control of the planet. To do that, they were after the so-called Dragon Core, a source of insane destructive power. If they succeeded, no heroes of Ratna would be able to stop them. Alejandro was acting independently and planned to personally lead the future planetary takeover. That was the reason behind all the experiments and his secret ties with certain ancient dragons. When Ellie finished her task, she received orders to dismantle the stage and erase all traces of what had happened. By then, Aethir was already trying to escape, drowning completely in fear and panic. Everything around her screamed that if she didn't get out immediately, her chances of survival were zero. Breaking free from the enclosed space, she breathed in the raw scent of earth and felt like the nightmare was about to end. Sensing something wrong, Ellie pushed herself to the limit to stop her. It was as if she knew this couldn't be allowed, and even committed to using her blades. Terrified, Aethir accelerated and did everything she could to tear herself out of the grip of slavery. In that instant, an unknown force grabbed her leg and yanked her back violently. It was Ellie, who had just activated the technique known as Divine Chains. At first glance, the girl looked gentle and harmless. So why was she blocking the wyvern's return to freedom? The answer lay in the magical barrier sealing this entire nightmarish zone. There were no archers and no guards, because escaping without the master's permission was impossible. By the time Aethir fully grasped the weight of the situation, it was already too late to react. To avoid watching how badly she suffered, it was better to shift focus to the crater dungeon. This was where 2 hunters decided to run a cleanup, old school style. Han took on the heavy lifting, slicing through monsters like it was just another day at work. His blade met no resistance, carving through even the most dangerous and grotesque bugs. He simply raised the sword and charged forward, opening their bellies like he'd unlocked a dev cheat code. Once the main wave was cleared, fresh monster reinforcements poured onto the battlefield. That's when a man who could turn into a dragon and command fire stepped into the spotlight. Addis could fight too, and sometimes his moves looked genuinely cinematic. In dragon form, he forgot all weakness and felt borderline unstoppable. After the battle ended, another friendly talk followed since the kills still didn't let Han level up. The core issue was simple. He kept fighting enemies that were too weak. If he challenged stronger monsters, mana would immediately surge through his body and trigger real progression. Dragons evolve differently. They rip life force from their enemies and absorb it into their dragon core. That kind of power is wildly unstable and dangerous to control, forcing Han to stick to the classic growth path. He simply needed to keep fighting, raising the difficulty step by step. During the conversation, he learned his friend was already over 150 years old. For dragons, that was basically teenage age, barely capable of independent decisions. Great dragons crave truly massive power and have zero interest in minor life energy. They believe extracting an enormous concentration of power in a single place will solve everything. This phenomenon is called a well of life force, though humans usually refer to it as a dragon nest. That was exactly what Alejandro had been discussing with the Great Earth mercenaries. Could it really be that these people planned to seize control of a dragon nest and turn that power against the locals? To exploit such a phenomenon, one must possess a dragon core. Right now, it seemed that the wyvern named Afir was passing through exactly that stage. She faced a real lethal threat, and her dragon core began to resonate in response. The stress reached a breaking point, her mind shutting down instantly and dragging her consciousness into a world of illusions. Everything around her became calm and weightless, like paradise where pain and problems simply didn't exist. Then she heard a familiar voice, belonging to the man she proudly called her father. It was Captain Baldy, the first to believe in Afir and dare to try taming her. The small wyvern remembered his warm hands and embraces, filled with care and affection. His scent was home to her, a symbol of peace and endless kindness. It was hard for Afir to accept that the captain had been dead for a long time and that this was only an illusion. After the king's death, the entire squadron of knights was wiped out. They were people who loved the wyvern and always tried to protect her. Captain Baldy appeared now to support a small child lost in a brutal adult world. He reminded her that heavy things happen sometimes, and one must learn to walk through them with head held high. No matter what awaited ahead, he believed in Afir and wished her the strength to endure every trial to the very end. Gradually, his voice faded, and the wyvern felt herself sinking into the dark waters of a quiet ocean. A sharp flash snapped her back to reality, where divine chains ripped her from the sky and slammed her down to the ground. Now, it was clear why Ellie had tried so desperately to stop her. She already knew a defensive barrier was active here, capable of severely injuring anyone who tried to escape. Afir was badly wounded and now urgently needed help and a healing potion. Ellie tried to assist and immediately demanded a vial of restorative elixir. At that exact moment, Don Alejandro appeared, having stayed late and deciding to intervene personally. He ordered the wyvern to be disposed of, stating she would die anyway even if they tried to save her. Ellie couldn't accept the order or come to terms with the death of the dying wyvern. She made a desperate decision and prepared to use the sharp edge of her sword. A quiet groan followed, and scarlet blood appeared on the blade. Don Alejandro sensed something wrong and spun around sharply to see what had happened. It turned out Ellie had deliberately wounded her own hand, forcing the boss to provide a potion capable of saving the creature. The act was filled with genuine compassion and empathy for Afir. The boss agreed to sacrifice another vial, but coldly warned that this trick would never work again. After that, the injured creature was moved to a quieter, safer location. Afir still didn't trust her savior and suspected she was aligned with the cruel humans. There was some truth in that thought, yet Ellie had always remained independent. Losing her sight, she gained a rare gift, the ability to sense energy flows around her. That was why she now felt a dragon core hidden within Afir. It sounded like pure madness, since a small wyvern should never have developed such a thing. But Ellie stood firm, confidently stating she clearly felt the energy radiating from inside Afir. She could have told the boss, who had long hunted for such an artifact. But the blind girl didn't do it, proving she could be trusted. Despite her despair, the wyvern finally decided to trust her new friend. Over time, they even began joking about Don Alejandro and grew closer, like longtime companions. In such harsh conditions, finding someone who understands you is everything. Without freedom and inner peace, it's easy to lose your mind. Meanwhile, their boss continued dealing in his dirty business. He launched his own investigation, trying to figure out who had forced an almost immortal skeleton to commit suicide. His assistant checked every hunter who had recently leveled up. He focused only on high ranks and completely ignored rookies, just like experts who overlooked the obvious threat right under their noses for years. Alejandro gradually realized that his true target was still at the very beginning of the growth path. He understood he was dealing with newcomers who skillfully hid behind their low level. But with razor-sharp intuition, he was certain that sooner or later he would track down everyone who tried to outplay him. The next day, young hunters gathered in the crater dungeon, thirsty for fame and flashy victories. The team had long been led by Brad, a guy who dreamed of becoming the biggest star on the entire continent. His partner Martin was his complete opposite, calm, balanced, and perfectly fine, staying out of the spotlight. Together, they clicked like a well-oiled machine, each covering the other's weaknesses. Over the past few years, the squad had made a serious leap forward, and that progress would have been impossible without the talented girls backing them up. Today, however, the support mages ran into unexpected trouble. Alice and Foal were caught in thick webs and desperately needed a strong, reliable hand. The tension spiked by the second, as spiders seemed to spawn straight out of thin air. Moves had to be clean and fast, or most of the team wouldn't be making it home. 2 massive spiders blocked the path, preventing the men from saving the girls, and the situation looked nearly hopeless. Suddenly, frost crept across the battlefield, and brutal Arctic cold rolled in like backup from hell. This wasn't random luck. Someone clearly knew spiders couldn't handle low temperatures. It seemed that after the recent fight with the skeleton, the mage had mastered yet another element. Addis arrived right on time with the Warrior of Volterra saving the rookies and making it clear who the real pros were. They handled the dirty work fast, freed the girls, and pushed forward toward the boss room. As always, Addis had zero trouble finding common ground with everyone in the squad. The guys called him sharp and calculating, while the girls practically fell for his looks on sight. Next to the charismatic Addis, his friend looked even darker, staying silent and constantly frowning. Just yesterday morning, Addis had warned him that they were switching strategies completely. There was no point in endlessly clearing dungeons if nobody ever heard about it. To earn a meeting with the goddess, they needed fame and buzz, making sure the hero of Volterra was talked about all across Ratna. From now on, they would help other hunters and let stories of their victories spread like wildfire. By the very next day, the plan was rolling, but one serious downside surfaced. His popularity with girls was about on the level of James Corden in comment sections, famous, but nobody was happy about it. The rookie team's captain also became a problem since he never acknowledged anyone else's authority. Brad had dreamed of being a leader and hometown hero since childhood, so he looked down on any competition. He had no clue what respect or gratitude for a saved life even meant. Han was ready to put the loudmouth in his place, but at that moment they were already standing at the boss room's entrance. This was where the artifact waited, the very reason people risked their skins. The massive chamber looked like ancient ruins abandoned centuries ago. Webs draped the walls, the air was still and damp, soaked in the heavy stench of decay. Right in the center lay the artifact. Only one step remained to claim it. The guys who had gambled their lives were ready to take the final step towards success. That was when the guardian spider descended from above, tasked with protecting the artifact from Chijiaruki. Instead of following the plan, Brad dashed forward, deciding to grab the artifact himself. Martin couldn't stand by while his friend risked his life and rushed in to help. Addis was about to intervene, but Han stopped him, suggesting they just watch the show. If the rookies were that full of themselves, they could handle all the dirty work alone. Every one of them believed they were about to become legends, clueless about what was coming next. The 2 sisters instantly activated their support magic, buffing the guys to the limit. Poison attacks stopped being scary and they went on the offensive. Everything went suspiciously smooth, like this fight had been rehearsed in advance. The monster dropped in seconds and nobody bothered hiding their joy. The sisters clapped, already imagining how tomorrow everyone would call them the heroes who cleared the crater. The job looked perfect, but only to amateurs, not to professionals who saw the cracks. When Brad turned to congratulate his friend, Martin was gone. Everyone tensed up as icy dread crawled through the rookies' bodies. Looking up, they realized just how badly they had screwed up by thinking the crater boss was already dead. The real monster had been above them the entire time, calmly watching the fight from the best seat in the house. The level 10 Tarantula Queen was seriously starving, and now she was clearly sizing up the humans as the perfect lunch combo. Before the real fight kicks off, it's worth touching on one of the biggest problems faced by adventurers working through guilds. Most of the time, hunters run into mid-tier monsters and deal with them without much trouble. Newbies start believing dungeons are safe, just as blindly as Hollywood believes another remake will magically save a trash script. But the moment a lone squad collides with an elite-class monster, their survival odds drop straight to zero. Those people never make it back to the guild to tell the story of meeting an elite. Because of that, rookies are never prepared for fights like this. The experience simply never reaches the next generation. Now, faced with a real threat, the self-confident egoist froze in place, waiting for unavoidable death. Brad had no idea what to do, and, for the first time, felt fate slipping out of his grip. In that moment, he clearly realized he could be crushed like a tiny ant under a human foot. Only Otis's perfectly timed intervention kept the guy alive. Nobody understood how a mage of the same level managed to block a lethal strike. Otis didn't explain anything, brushing it off as using the right technique at the right time. Meanwhile, the Tarantula Queen demanded food and had no intention of stopping. That's when someone stepped in who had long stopped fearing death and had zero plans to retreat. The warrior of Volterra challenged the beast while Brad desperately searched for an escape route. He kept insisting they had to pull back and warn other hunters so no one else would enter. What he failed to understand was that real heroes think differently. The monster had to be destroyed here and now so no one else would ever fall into its web. And if Brad was that terrified, he could hide and wait while others handled the problem. The Sword King raised his weapon, preparing to unleash that legendary cleaving strike. The shockwave knocked the unprepared hunter off his feet, while Addis clamped his hands over his ears. The Tarantula Queen had been considered invincible, right up until this day. A single blow was enough to crack her skull and erase the threat for good. After a brief pause, the monster collapsed, almost as if kneeling before the victors. Her core began pulsing violently, triggering a self-destruction sequence. She screamed like someone who had just realized there was no undo button in real life. The explosion was inevitable, but Otis activated a defensive barrier in time, shielding everyone. It was a clean cinematic victory, brighter than any legend written in old books. For defeating such a powerful monster, Han gained a massive amount of points, but this was only the beginning. Now, they could safely collect the artifact and head back to a secure zone. After the battle, Brad looked completely shattered. He had gone through extreme stress, sat on the floor, and couldn't hold back his tears. All this time, he thought he was the best, only to realize he was just a weak guy, unready for reality. No one immediately told him that his friends were safe, and Martin and the sisters were unharmed. The captain believed the team was dead and blamed himself for everything. That state lasted until they returned to the city. There, he saw his teammates alive and well, shocked by his behavior. It was made very clear that saviors are thanked, not insulted. Martin explained that the hero of Volterra had personally pulled him out from under the monster's strike. Brad realized his mistake and apologized on the spot. Along with the rest of the hunters, he thanked the saviors and swore they would repay that debt someday. After that, Han said his goodbyes and stepped outside to breathe fresh air. His level was still too low to use the artifact himself. The spear didn't suit the mage either, so they decided to give it to the rookies who had dreamed of it since childhood. Otis enjoyed seeing their happy faces. Helping others genuinely made him smile. The mission was a success, though no one realized they were being watched. At the same time, a man in a carriage had been searching for two guys sketched in his notebook for quite a while. The man with glasses was named Emil Otto, and at first glance it was impossible to tell whose side he was on. He could turn out to be a kind-hearted ally, or the most dangerous pirate imaginable. Han felt a quiet satisfaction knowing everything had gone according to plan, and the flow of events was finally bending the right way. There was no longer any doubt that stories about his feats were spreading fast, crawling through the city like wildfire, with whispers already following him wherever he went. He noticed Addis step aside to talk with the wagon driver and almost instantly caught a strange shift in his tone and body language. The young mage was visibly shaken when he recognized the face of the man who suddenly demanded a private conversation. A few seconds later, they slipped out of sight and rolled off so fast that nobody really understood what just happened, leaving the hero of Volterra behind. From the outside, it looked like a clean abduction, though Addis made no attempt to resist or fight back. He hadn't brought his magic staffs, already drained during the battle, and that choice quietly came back to haunt him. Emil Otto urged him to stay calm, making it clear he wanted a quiet talk without panic or sudden moves. As Emil studied the young man, he became increasingly certain that this really was the younger brother of Lady Adora Bannister. The man in glasses had personally known Addis's sister, the same woman who fought the great dragons alongside the four heroes 10 years ago. That battle had been carved into history books and turned into a legend still told to children across the continent. It was Adora who laid the foundation for the Supreme Draconium Brotherhood, tasked with watching the Great Dragons. Emil was deeply concerned that after her death, the current head of the Bannister family had withdrawn from the world entirely. He came to this meeting to make sure Addis was still safe and hadn't sold his soul to the dark side. When they reached their destination, the mage struggled to hide his shock at what he saw. They had stopped right in front of his own home, and Addis couldn't understand why he'd been brought here. The moment Addis disappeared from view, Han launched forward without hesitation and went after him. Using his speed, he quickly located the right wagon and prepared to step in if things turned ugly. Two enraged hunters moved in, and Emil Otto suddenly had nowhere left to retreat. They grabbed him and made it painfully clear that such a sudden appearance wouldn't come cheap. For several minutes, they beat him down hard, until a strange holy pendant was found beneath his clothes. It turned out they had just beaten a priest serving the goddess of light. An awkward silence followed, after which they untied him and rushed to apologize. Addis pretended to be completely uninvolved and subtly implied that his wild companion had attacked the priest on his own. Emil finally calmed down and decided it was time to explain his true intentions. He offered official cooperation with the Order of Light and promised access to classified information. His main focus was a man named Alejandro, currently residing in a refugee village near the Crater Valley. The hunters had never heard of him, even though he had been tracking them for quite some time. To clarify the situation, Emil suggested explaining the origins of the refugee village in more detail. These people weren't native to the city, but after the crater appeared, hunters flooded the region from every direction. A sudden spike in taxes forced ordinary citizens to abandon the city and search for somewhere, anywhere, to survive. That was how a small, struggling village was born, barely holding itself together. Even in those harsh conditions, people still tried to smile and cling to whatever scraps of happiness they could find. The real problem was that monsters occasionally descended on the settlement. These creatures slaughtered indiscriminately, killing elders and children alike. There were no professional hunters in the village, making resistance nearly impossible. Ordinary workers were forced to grab weapons and defend their families however they could. The settlement was dying faster than Kanye's reputation after another so-called genius take. The Holy Order had no right to directly govern territories, but cooperation with hunters was allowed. Emil asked for help and, in return, promised to arrange a meeting with the goddesses themselves. The offer sounded tempting, and Addis was ready to agree, but Han stopped him just in time, sensing something off. The issue ran much deeper, because Alejandro's base was located right in Crater Valley. Rumors claimed that a real dragon's nest was hidden there. Confirming that would require a full investigation before involving the Order. Without solid proof, Alejandro was technically innocent in the eyes of the Church. Some refugees even called him their hero and protector. He sent his agents to wipe out monsters and cleanse the land of threats. The blind girl and the wyvern often handled the dirtiest work, saving civilians on the front lines. They openly claimed to act under Don Alejandro's orders, and people began to worship him. No one had any idea what he was truly planning, or what awaited the continent of Ratna in the near future. It all started with Don Alejandro's idea to send his assistant to the refugee village under the cover of a simple, noble mission. He claimed he only wanted to help the needy, speaking so convincingly it felt like the spirit of a world savior had suddenly awakened inside him. For the rest of the tasks, the girl was supposed to be assisted by Handy, a man who had worked near the dragon nest for a long time. From the very beginning, Ellie wasn't sure he could be trusted, sensing that something in this assignment was hidden between the lines. Still, she couldn't refuse a direct order and was forced to accept the mission. Doubts and questions swirled in her head, and during one fight, she nearly paid for it with her life. A massive monster crept up from behind and struck at the exact moment the huntress least expected it. Only the wyvern's timely intervention saved her, firmly establishing Afir as a full-fledged member of the team. After the battle, they spent a long time washing themselves, scrubbing off sticky, foul-smelling slime and traces of combat. Once the job was done and Kalinor's family was safe, the two friends headed to the nearest lake to catch their breath. They talked calmly, laughed, and for a brief moment felt the rare comfort of a carefree life. For Ellie, it was a chance to remember her childhood, since she had been forced to grow up far too early. Long ago, her mother used to brush her hair every morning before leaving for work, promising she'd be back soon. Back then, little Ellie had no idea her mother was a hunter, risking her life every day for money. Her mother was a swordswoman and taught her daughter basic fencing techniques from an early age. Watching those trainings felt like peeking into a real fairy tale. The aura filling the room brought a sense of freshness, warmth, and safety that could never be forgotten. One day, her mother didn't come home, and a week later, he appeared at the doorstep. Don Alejandro introduced himself as the girl's savior and took her away, effectively turning her into his property. He did everything to rob her of her sight and make her a permanent outcast with no freedom of choice. From that moment on, her life filled with pain, fear, and the absence of freedom, inevitably reshaping her character. Ellie tried to escape more than once and even sought help from inquisitors, but every attempt ended in failure. Each time she told the truth and asked for help, those people died soon after. Alejandro made sure the girl understood one thing clearly: she now belonged entirely to him. Even as a child, Ellie realized no help was coming and that she'd have to build her future on her own. Over time, it became clear there was only one way to get rid of Alejandro and the other outsiders. The dragon nest had to be forced to process all life energy and turn it into a useless residue. The wyvern couldn't yet control or refine such power, so all that remained was to wait. If rumors about the dragon nest spread, a stronger dragon might eventually appear nearby. That was exactly what Alejandro was aiming for, acting like a predator, carefully setting his trap in advance. He never gambled blindly and struck only when he was sure of victory. Most likely, he already knew how to extract a dragon core and only needed to find a great dragon. The manga subtly hinted that this great dragon could turn out to be Addis. According to the priest's plan, he would have to infiltrate that place alone. Han objected immediately, making it clear he would never let his friend go without backup. He wanted to go with him and keep the situation under control, staying a part of the team. However, Han was told his identity was too suspicious and could ruin the entire operation. If he wanted the mission to succeed, he would have to stay out of it. After a short pause, the mage made his choice and agreed to those terms. He asked the Sword King to step back and let him deal with the threat to humanity himself. Now, all that remained was to settle minor details and prepare for the mission's launch. The friends argued for a long time, voices raised, because each of them was right in his own way. Han didn't want to take risks, while Addis fully understood the price that might have to be paid. His sister had sacrificed her life destroying the last dragon nest. He had to finish the family's unfinished duty, or he would never find peace, even if it meant risking his own life. After the argument, they went their separate ways, and the very next day, the meeting with the priest took place. He handed over all the necessary documents and reminded them of one important detail. To lower suspicion, Addis would have to play the role of a girl. Given his appearance, it turned out to be a challenge he could actually pull off. Just a few days earlier, hunters and mages had begun gathering near the dragon nest. Don Alejandro opened recruitment for service, officially to fight monsters, while also upgrading the dragon nest's infrastructure. Hunters from all over the country were ready to sign up, tempted by solid pay for seriously dangerous work. First, though, everyone had to pass selection and prove real combat qualifications. From the start, it was obvious this wasn't a playground for rookies without real battlefield scars. Only the toughest and most fearless fighters earned a shot at joining the team. Handy personally tested every candidate, making sure no one tried to fake their way in. Ellie stayed nearby as well, controlling the process through her sensitivity to ambient mana. She caught magical fluctuations without fail and instantly sensed when someone tried to hide their true skill. When it was time for the next inspection, what happened genuinely surprised everyone around. Among the hardened men appeared a beautiful red-haired girl with an unexpectedly cute face. It was hard to believe this was Addis, since the transformation looked almost flawless. At first, he wasn't ready for such a role and had to be persuaded a little. But once all preparations were complete, he turned into a full-on magnet for wandering eyes. Even though he hated every second of it, Addis took the risk for the sake of the mission. Emil Otto handed him his glasses to make the image complete and believable. The priest paused for a moment and even felt an odd stir of emotion while looking at this so-called beauty. The mage's core mission was to find out whether the dragon nest truly existed. Hunters went through a full-scale screening, but mages were treated differently. Spellcasters were considered far more valuable assets and were allowed through without extra trials. When Addis stated his level, Ellie immediately narrowed her eyes. She clearly saw he was hiding his true level and tried to understand why. Ellie was genuinely worried, afraid Alejandro might gain another powerful ally. That was exactly why she decided to intervene and personally keep an eye on the new mage. After checking the documents, Handy accepted the sorceress into the team without hesitation. The crowd wasn't happy, since others had risked their lives for that same spot. Ellie refused to let it slide and decided to personally test the newcomer. She raised her sword, making it clear this would be a combat check. The clash started without warning, and an ice technique triggered faster than a blade could rise. Even while playing a girl, Addis had no intention of softening his hard-edged nature. For the mission, he was ready to go all the way and didn't even consider backing down at the critical moment. Just as the fighters were about to exchange blows, an overconfident contender burst out of the crowd, self-assured in the same delusional way as a crypto guru before another guaranteed moonshot. The brute clearly overestimated himself and started acting unhinged from the first second. He was furious about not being accepted and decided to prove his so-called power by challenging everyone at once. Inflated ambition quickly drowned out the last traces of common sense. Addis reacted instantly, shielding his opponent and preventing a lethal outcome. He was ready to continue the fight, but at that moment, the appointed local judge stepped in. Handy only looked like a friendly, always smiling guy at first glance. The moment someone crossed the line, he turned into a ruthless and merciless enforcer. One single strike was enough to shut the conflict down completely. No amount of muscle mass saved the violator from the consequences. He crashed to the ground, knocked out cold, along with all his swagger. It became obvious that Handy also used aura and, like many here, hid his real power. This recap has mentioned aura more than once, and now it was time to break down what it really is. Aura is a crimson energy a person begins to emit when body and life force are pushed to their absolute limit. Once awakened, physical capabilities break far beyond normal boundaries. Learning this, Han decided to train non-stop, chasing the awakening of his own aura. So far, nothing worked, and from the outside he looked like someone grinding endlessly while his body resisted every step. It all started back when Addis was still around, constantly giving advice and guidance. Sometimes the training ended in awkward, even comedic situations, forcing them to take a break and reset. These guys always managed to mess everything up the moment they were given a little freedom and the leash got loosened. During long talks, Addis slowly tried to open his friend's eyes to an important truth. He explained that every person carries different elements, growth paths, and hidden potential within them. Everyone has a natural talent, but without constant training, it stays completely useless. Awakening aura is considered the hardest stage, since even decades of brutal training come with no guarantees. Only when someone reaches the absolute peak of physical and life force does the body begin to radiate aura. Like it or not, Han would have to break through his own limits if he wanted real results. Dangerous dungeons were packed with monsters on the skeleton's level and far beyond. Without aura, beating creatures like that was almost impossible. Normal strikes simply didn't cut it. From the looks of it, Handy also possessed aura and deliberately kept that fact hidden. In a flash of anger, he let a bit of his talent slip, and sharp eyes immediately noticed. After all inspections and trials were complete, the selected fighters were sent into the crater. At last, Addis saw the dragon nest from the inside and instantly understood what he was dealing with. Countless workers were toiling there, clearly grinding non-stop without days off or any real protection. Only when replacements arrived did they get a chance to catch their breath after exhausting shifts. At first glance, the place should have looked like a natural formation shaped by nature itself. But now it was obvious that everything pointed to an artificial origin. Ellie still didn't trust the new mage and practically followed her every step. She should have realized by now they were on the same side and needed to act together. No matter what, it felt more like a massive isolated island built for some twisted purpose. Handy cut off the girls' conversation and announced it was time to meet Don Alejandro. The boss personally wanted to see the new mage and judge her potential. Walking through the dark corridor, Addis felt cold sweat slide down his spine, knowing Alejandro wasn't someone you could underestimate or treat lightly. During the conversation, Handy suddenly started asking about the dragon nest and the Holy Order. It turned out he had been a spy all along, secretly cooperating with the church. His pendant erased any doubt and made it clear where his loyalty truly lay. Before the end, he warned that Alejandro was dangerous and extremely cunning, demanding constant caution. The moment the doors swung open, Handy came face to face with death. He lost an eye instantly. Alejandro had long suspected him of betrayal. The boss waited for the perfect moment to eliminate the church's agent. He tore off the pendant and burst into laughter, savoring his dominance. Now Alejandro was convinced the new mage also worked for the Holy Order. Addis, who was only supposed to meet the boss, instantly became a target marked for execution. From here, lately, Ellie couldn't hide the growing discomfort weighing on her. She usually felt a distinct energy whenever she touched the wyvern, but suspicion took root that the mage might actually be a dragon, and the theory needed urgent confirmation. At that moment, both girls lifted their heads at the same time, and knew things had gone off the rails. Chaos already ruled Don Alejandro's office, and stopping it was no longer an option. Instead of a calm mission kickoff, Addis was thrown straight into the center of serious trouble. Without magic stones, he couldn't properly use spells, and every second made things worse. The boss quickly pieced together why the Order of Light was so focused on him and the truth of the Dragon Nest. They needed a legitimate reason to Mashatsa and send inquisitors here. That meant all unnecessary witnesses had to be erased without hesitation. By showing up, Addis had effectively signed his own death sentence, desperately clinging to life. Don Alejandro had been using the Dragon Nest as bait, a shiny lure meant to draw out a real dragon. Now, if the guy transformed into a dragon, he would become the perfect test subject. If no, the clash unfolded head-on, and it was obvious how well prepared the boss really was. Until now, Addis, running on fumes, barely managed to block the attacks with ice magic, holding the pressure back. That strategy couldn't bring victory, only by a few extra seconds. Alejandro felt absolute confidence, his smile growing wider with every passing moment. He outclassed his opponent not only in magic, but also in speed, fully controlling the fight. The Wyvern and the blind girl had no idea how to act in this situation. They felt if Addis took dragon form, all of this monster's plans would come true. That couldn't be allowed, and if things went too far, they would have to step in. Ellie made a firm decision that she no longer wanted to stay a passive observer. She had seen too much death to pretend nothing was happening again. If action was required, even at the cost of her own life, she was ready. The Wyvern also vowed to help, even though fear and panic were tearing her apart inside. By this point, Addis was nearly unable to keep fighting. His body was completely drained, while his opponent didn't even try to hide his dominance. Alejandro waited for the moment when the mage would have no options left. He gave Addis one final chance to reveal his true nature. If he didn't turn into a dragon right now, death was guaranteed. Seconds stretched endlessly, but the guy in women's clothes didn't break or hesitate. He was ready to die, and that was the exact moment fate decided to reward his gamble. The flash of light was no accident. Don Alejandro tensed instantly, realizing something was happening, just not the way he planned. From that moment on, Addis no longer mattered to him. It became clear he wasn't a true great dragon. Somewhere very close, a real monster rose, its presence rippling outward and resonating with the energy of the place. Ellie appeared nearby at once and seized the moment to pass on a short, precise signal. Without extra words, she made it clear she was on the side of good and still playing her role to tear evil apart from within. Ellie ran up to the boss and calmly reported that the dragon had entered from the other side of the wall. Don Alejandro smiled, almost glowing. He could feel his plan approaching its peak. If Addis wasn't a real dragon, he was useless, like a Fortnite teammate who quits right after the first knock. Either way, the boss had already completed his experiment, and his eyes showed complete satisfaction with the result. He was convinced there were no traitorous spies left in his ranks, just waiting to stab him in the back. He was ready to slit Addis's throat when Ellie suddenly stepped forward and chose to protect him. She claimed she sensed disharmony in this place and that an extra mage could still be useful. Ellie, more bluntly, that the mage was perfect for the dirtiest jobs no one else wanted to touch. Alejandro felt no threat and even smirked. The logic appealed to him. Thanks to the blind girl's cunning, Addis once again dodged death's touch and stayed standing. But now, he would have to be several times more careful not to stumble at the very last step. Once alone, they exchanged looks, spoke quickly, and discussed future strategy without prying ears. There were no secrets anymore. Both were trying to destroy the dragon nest, but everything had to be done quietly and carefully. Suddenly, the doors burst open, and a massive wyvern nearly killed their favorite mage in a single lunge. Then, Addis heard the little dragon's name and instantly recalled his friend's story, burned straight into memory. This was the very wyvern responsible for what happened hours earlier. She had pretended to be a dragon instead of Addis, and drawn all the attention to herself. Ifir enjoyed basking in the spotlight. For the first time in her life, she had done something truly meaningful and felt it herself. Addis noted that he had already heard stories about this wyvern from his closest friend and never doubted the rumors were true. Hans survived and never forgot who helped him at the very beginning, back when he had just arrived in this world as a complete nobody. Ifir couldn't even imagine that this guy was still alive, and deep down she honestly hoped he had been wiped out a long time ago. Sometimes it feels like the main character is straight up impossible to defeat, and other times he creates his own problems, like peace and quiet just bore him to death. Left alone in the house, he got bored fast and even started thinking about heading back to the Rocky Mountains and disappearing all over again. It turned out the toilet didn't work for people with too low a level, which sounded like pure mockery. The same could be said about everything inside this cursed house. Every single thing was designed to test your limits. You couldn't eat properly, wash properly, drink water, or even rest like a normal human being. Everything around him felt tailor-made for elite hunters, used to living under the world's maximum difficulty settings. To avoid completely losing his mind, the guy dropped everything and went straight to the local guild, anywhere with actual air to breathe. He wanted at least some kind of job, but rules were rules. A hunter couldn't take missions without their master, and the guard stood firm. A massive wild boar got furious, roared, and demanded work, threatening to wreck the place if nobody gave him something to do. The female administrator rushed to calm him down and hinted that she could use his help with a personal problem, and this time, it wasn't a joke. Recently, truth be told, she didn't miss him that much, but the jerk stole her glasses, which meant he had to be found and punished. Han immediately recognized the priest Emil Otto and realized the church representative had clearly stepped into some serious trouble. He received a voice recording from the administrator and instantly switched into full Sherlock mode, piecing together clues bit by bit. He promised to find her brother, but made it clear right away that he wasn't going to kill him, no matter how tempting that sounded to her. He had zero desire to dive into an Addams family-level mess where only those who stay quieter than Jeff Bezos' security ever survive. For once, the system actually decided to help, not sabotage him, pushing things forward instead of blocking the path. A few hours later, the Sword King was already out in the desert beyond the city, where rocky terrain began and prying eyes ended. He could feel it. Holy energy was close, and all it took was a few correct steps without going the wrong way. There was nothing around, and only hours of searching led him to the right cave, hidden deep within stone. Right now, two horrific monsters were tormenting an ordinary priest inside, savoring every breath he took. They mocked him like edgy teenagers trying to wreck a lesson, proving how cool disbelief supposedly was. Emil Otto was still holding on, but his face made it clear his time was almost up. The monsters tried to squeeze out any information they could, digging for how the Order of Light really worked and where its weak spots lay. Once, they had been human, until experiments twisted them into allies of Don Alejandro, selling themselves piece by piece. One of them was a reeking worm who used to be considered a great scientist, always walking with his head held high. He had led the experiments, turning countless people into monster-like weapons, shaping flesh as if it were clay. If they didn't get answers, they promised to turn the priest into stew and feed him to pigs. No drama, no mercy. And if that still wasn't enough, they would burn his entire village along with friends and family just to make the pain complete. They knew how to pressure and manipulate, but sometimes even the most twisted plans collapse in a single second. A nuclear typhoon burst in out of nowhere, blasting those creatures aside like trash in the wind. The warrior of Volterra walked straight through walls and didn't even flinch, crossing the guards as if they never existed. They failed to stop him, but instantly knew who he was. Rumors and descriptions of the hero had already spread across the city. Catching their breath, the monsters rushed him, convinced his legend was just a bedtime story for the weak. Han studied each of them carefully and felt it. These were former humans, broken by experiments and twisted into grotesque forms. He didn't want to kill people, because the old man's warning echoed in his head like a commandment. Kill even one human, and he would become a maniac beyond saving, with no road back. The Sword King didn't activate his skills right away and tried to resolve things with words, naive as that looked. The monsters burst out laughing at the sight of a level 5, like an audience watching a Disney actor suddenly attempt serious drama. By then, Emil Otto had freed his hands and legs and managed to stagger away, barely standing but alive. He quickly grasped the situation and decided to give his ally one short, brutal piece of advice. No fluff attached. The priest warned that these monsters hadn't been human for a long time. They sold their souls and chose this path themselves. The system identified each of them as demons, leaving only one option: clean up the trash before it multiplied. Han snapped straight into berserker mode, unleashing a storm ready to tear his enemies apart. Despite his massive build, he stayed flexible and fast, like he was back in peak combat training days. Losing the first round didn't break the monsters. They charged again immediately, roaring and trying to overwhelm him with numbers. If they wanted to dance, Han was more than happy to lead them in a high-level tango, brutal and bone-breaking. Until this fight, Emil Otto had underestimated what kind of raw talent could be pulled into the Order of Light, and it shook him hard. Now, he even regretted sending Addis on the mission instead of asking the hero of Volterra for help from the start. This guy could have wiped the crater off the map a long time ago, but regrets were useless now and changed absolutely nothing. The priest began apologizing, fully aware that Addis wouldn't escape Alejandro's grip without a real storm breaking loose. One of the spies stopped responding, and that meant only one thing: the twisted boss had uncovered the Order's moves. Han's response was short and sharp. He needed the exact location of the crater to raise hell there and pull his friend out. Alejandro, meanwhile, wasted no time and continued his grotesque experiments deep inside the bowels of his laboratory. He had crossed every legal and moral line long ago, leaving him with nothing left to lose. The dragon nest was still a mystery, but one thing was clear: the power of the dragon core was needed for even darker experiments. Previous trials hadn't delivered the desired result, though some people had indeed turned into dangerous monsters. The supply of dragon energy was nearly drained, demanding harsher and more extreme measures. The monsters were becoming harder to control, and without control, conquering the world made no sense. On top of that, the Order was closing in fast, meaning security had to be reinforced immediately. Alejandro issued orders to his assistant and demanded constant vigilance from all personnel. Another spy slipping through was unacceptable. One mistake could bring the whole structure crashing down. He knew the Order's fighters were coming soon, and he had to be ready when they did. A full week had already passed since Addis arrived at the massive dragon nest. He socialized with the girls and never once revealed the truth about his male identity. He looked so convincingly feminine that, honestly, no one seemed particularly bothered by it. Aoife increasingly found herself alone and met Ellie less and less. Sometimes, they still broke the rules, secretly discussing how to sabotage the boss's plans. Addis wanted to transform into a dragon himself and use that power to help everyone at once. They had just begun working out a plan when the roar of a crowd suddenly echoed. People gathered around one spot, completely unsure of what to do next. A massive creature burst from the ground, an insatiable monster devouring everything in its path. Among the workers was Kalinor, someone who absolutely could not afford to die here. The former criminal had a family, and becoming lunch for a giant boar was not an option. When people realized this was no joke, they scattered like ants fleeing a crushed nest. Panic exploded, and every old plan shattered in an instant. Action had to be fast and precise, and strangely enough, Aoife realized this first. She liked being in the spotlight and once again wanted to do something that truly mattered. The wyvern surged forward as if challenging everyone left behind. Kalinor hesitated, stumbled, and slammed into the cold ground, as if luck had finally turned its back on him. Lifting his head, he saw death right in front of him, ready to tear it off at any second. His entire life flashed before his eyes, and then a sudden spark of hope appeared out of nowhere. It was the wyvern, slicing through the air like Zeus's spear. The monster's attention snapped to her, giving Kalinor a chance to escape. The beast began hurling rocks at the flying target, trying to knock her out of the sky. Sharp maneuvers and raw speed were the only way to keep rescue from turning into disaster. After flying several dozen more meters, Aoife turned around and struck again with fire. The scene was so intense, it felt like pure cinematic effects unleashed. Victory seemed close, until the monster made one last desperate charge. It grabbed the wyvern by the neck, making it painfully clear how badly it wanted to devour her. At the same time, Alejandro was preparing for the coming battle, its scent already soaking into the walls. For the first time in ages, he pulled out his artifacts, sensing control slipping away. Obsessed with dominance, he felt exhilaration and craved blood as soon as possible. He could feel it. The Inquisitors and Order fighters were already nearby, and the battle would start without warning. An assistant burst into the room to report the clash in the crater. For the failure, he was executed instantly by an artifact. No words, no hesitation. These worms had to learn one rule: Don Alejandro never forgives mistakes. He looked outside and saw the chaos, and it ignited a true hunger for battle inside him. The monster had truly gone berserk, and only by sheer miracle did the wyvern manage to break free from its deadly grip. Helping from the ground was almost impossible, since all the key action was unfolding high in the air. Aoife pushed her dragon core to the absolute limit, channeling every drop of power into destroying her opponent. It all looked like a happy ending, fake calm, polished and staged, like a Logan Paul apology video with perfect lighting. Aoife lifted the monster high above the ground and without hesitation triggered a devastating magical explosion. The massive boar shattered into pieces and would never again be a problem for the local residents. A thick cloud of dust swallowed everything, and people didn't immediately realize the battle was finally over. Moments later, Afir landed on the ground, feeling a rare mix of confidence and light, carefree relief. For the second time in her life, she achieved real success and became the center of everything happening around her. Everything went smoothly until the second Ellie sensed danger approaching, carrying a terrifying concentration of mana. Her reaction was instant. She moved without thinking and shielded her best friend with her own body. The sheer power of the energy surge made it clear the boss had finally stepped out of his warm, comfortable office. Don Alejandro, armed with artifacts, clearly wasn't in the mood for jokes or mercy today. He had once claimed the wyvern should be disposed of, but now he realized how badly he had misjudged her. This small flying creature turned out to be the true source of the magical energy spike. The wyvern carried a dragon core inside her, and the boss intended to extract it for his twisted ambitions. Stopping him meant fighting to the very end, and Addis was ready for that. He instantly drowned the area in flames, burning every possible retreat and closing all paths back. Ellie supported him at once, striking from behind and amplifying the effect of total surprise. Together, they were sure they could kill the boss, or at least buy the wyvern enough time to escape. The plan looked solid, but fate had other ideas and quickly rewrote the script. Their biggest mistake was underestimating Don Alejandro's true power. On his own, he was a strong hunter, but his real weapons were magical artifacts. The moment he pulled his two favorite daggers from the chest, the threat level instantly hit maximum. If Han truly wanted to save his friends, he had to reach the crater as fast as possible. As it turned out, Priest Emil Otto was far less sharp than he initially seemed. He knew the crater lay somewhere among the desert and rocky mountains, but had no idea of its exact location. Because of that, they wandered in circles for hours, unable to figure out where to go next. During their conversation, it became clear that Han wasn't just a killer hungry for blood and battles. Above all else, he wanted to save his friend and cared about his fate more than fame. Even after their earlier conflict, Addis remained the most important person to him in this new world. Even the priest was moved, seeing this side of the guy for the first time. He had always believed Volterra's heroes were mindless killers, but reality proved far more complex. In the middle of the conversation, a flash of light revealed where the crater was truly hidden. Han immediately took position and prepared for explosive acceleration without hesitation. It turned out this guy wasn't just insanely strong. He was fast, like a bullet fired point blank. If he made it in time, Addis's life would no longer be in danger. By now, the main players had already warmed up properly before the decisive phase. The first round ended, and strangely enough, Don Alejandro achieved what he wanted with little trouble. He avoided direct confrontation, caught up to the wyvern, and seized her dragon core. Now, he no longer needed additional energy and could fully unleash his horrific plan. Addis tried with everything he had to transform into a dragon, but every attempt failed. By this, she had long suspected he was building a machine to drain life energy from living beings. The power of the Dragon Core turned that insane project into reality. Now, a single command would be enough for all living creatures on the continent to start losing life force. That would mean total world collapse and Alejandro's rise as a new ruler of all existence. He didn't delay the dessert and immediately moved to deal with the spies. Beyond his dagger mastery, he was also skilled in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Spinning strikes and sharp kicks gave Alejandro a clear and deadly advantage. No one could stop him, and at one point he coldly disarmed Ellie when she was left without support. A heartbeat later, one of the daggers sank into her flesh, and the girl screamed as sharp, piercing pain tore through her. Even the wyvern felt how badly her friend was suffering, and tears welled up in her eyes. She lunged forward to help, but a blade pierced her wing and pinned her to the ground, stripping away her freedom. The boss wasn't in a rush to kill his assistant. First, he intended to drain her dry, down to the very last drop. The energy extraction device was already active, humming, and ready to perform its horrific task. In the final seconds, Alejandro even admitted that he had killed Ellie's mother with his own hands. After that came the finishing blow, and the tension died instantly, like an NBA game when one team is up by 40 in the first quarter. By then, Addis came back to his senses and remembered that, above all else, he was still a powerful mage. His fire responded even with his mana reserves nearly empty. He forced the impossible out of himself and stopped the madness, quite literally gifting Ellie a second life. The girl fell into a deep pit, and the wyvern dove after her without hesitation to save her. By that moment, Addis had already freed Afir, and the three fighters were reunited once more. Left one-on-one with a powerful opponent, the dragon didn't panic. He breathed deeply and tracked Alejandro's every move. He had to act fast and precise, pouring all remaining energy into a single decisive strike. Hades hadn't unleashed power like this in a long time, and when the flames reached the boss, the impact was devastating. For a split second, it looked like victory was within reach, but the boss flipped the situation as he always did. Again and again, he found the path to advantage, as if someone was feeding him the right moves. The world dulled in an instant, colors drained away, and the mage felt the end crawling over his skin. The strongest attack failed, mana dropped to 0, and regeneration couldn't keep up. Just when death seemed inevitable, another participant crashed into the fight. It was the madman who usually ruined everything, but this time, he showed up right on cue and earned applause. Han genuinely froze when he saw his best friend dressed as a girl. Like a grandpa in YouTube comments, he instantly misunderstood everything without a second thought. Right after that, Han labeled Alejandro a full-on creep who enjoyed dressing guys in women's clothes. For things like that, he was ready to deliver punishment personally and without mercy. The very first hit crushed the boss's nose and made him look utterly pathetic. Alejandro, who believed himself invincible, was launched into the unknown. The shockwave was so powerful that all of Hades's magic attacks felt insignificant by comparison. Even the Sword King was briefly surprised, not expecting such raw destructive force from himself. Most of Alejandro's bones were shattered, but for someone like him, that was still not the end. He would likely regenerate soon and return to the fight with renewed fury. Thanks to the Dragon Core, Alejandro could constantly draw power from an endless source. Right now, killing him was nearly impossible, and he looked almost unbeatable. This enemy felt like something straight out of hell, and only a miracle could stop him. In all the chaos, they nearly forgot about Ellie, who had fallen into the crater. The Wyvern managed to catch her, but the girl still slammed her head hard against the ground. Her condition looked critical. Internal bleeding wouldn't stop. Her breathing was barely audible, and for a moment Afir thought her friend was gone. Then Ellie coughed and came to, as if her lungs were filling with blood. She had to get back fast, because the fight was spiraling toward its worst outcome. Before the next round, Han finally realized he wasn't fighting just an enemy, but a true devil. He had never faced a human with such an absurd number of abilities. With the solid body of the Volterra warrior was now Han's only real advantage. He had to become an immovable rock, or the entire fight would be meaningless. The first clash ended in a blinding flash and a massive shockwave. Hades quickly understood that he didn't belong here. This level of combat was beyond him. The real fighters had to settle who the true main character was, and the one who liked wearing a dress could stand aside for now and try not to get in the way. Don Alejandro felt genuine satisfaction realizing he had finally met a worthy opponent. He hadn't felt real resistance in so long that he almost forgot how to activate proper techniques, like a streamer suddenly losing internet mid-broadcast. Spinning his blades, he bent the wind itself to his will, rising above sky and earth as if gravity had given up. This was no longer just a hunter, but an abnormal monster, and beating him would require straining every single muscle. Despite lacking flashy skills, Han calmly stopped the raging whirlwind with nothing but raw strength. One precise motion was enough to block the attack and loom over his opponent at the same time. That was the exact moment the balance of power truly shifted, and it looked clean as hell. Gasping for air, Alejandro tried to figure out when exactly he had miscalculated. Victory was supposed to be effortless, yet everything went wrong from the very start. If not for Hades's intervention, the villain would have already lost his head. His friend couldn't watch that happen and made it clear that the local boss must not be killed. Even in death, the power of the Dragon Core would instantly drag him back to life. To ruin Alejandro had to be stalled while his underground laboratory was wiped off the map. While Hades dealt with destroying the dragon nest, Han would keep the main villain busy. This was turning into a real party where levels no longer mattered. The strongest would win, even if that meant challenging fate itself. Not only Hades, but Afir and Ellie as well went searching for the source of power. They moved through sealed underground chambers, probing for the boss's weak point. Thanks to Ellie's fine mana control, she sensed danger long before it struck. Together, they did solid work, but the bleeding was still a serious problem. The wound was dangerous, and only fast action could prevent brutal consequences. Ellie ignored the pain and kept moving forward no matter what. At last, dozens of bodies lay scattered around, completely drained of energy by Alejandro. He was badly starved, since the boss had long forgotten that this monster even needed food. It turned out to be Handy, the same spy who was supposed to die after meeting the boss. Alejandro spared him and instead turned him into a loyal monster for dirty work. A level 50 human with a powerful aura became lethally dangerous after the transformation. He knew the enemy was too strong and that every move had to be cold and calculated. The fight above them. From the outside it looked spectacular, but not for those gambling with their lives. Alejandro openly admitted he was an outsider and felt zero regret about it. He wanted to wipe out the locals and make them pay for hunting people like him. He knew together they could cleanse Ratna and build a perfect country for those from Earth. If the price was killing innocent people, he would never take that deal. Sometimes the right choice brings pain and humiliation, and today was exactly that kind of day. Despite everything, Han felt that luck was still on his side. He knew. Hearing that, Alejandro burst into laughter, clearly convinced the plan was impossible. All this time, a medallion hung around his neck, preventing anyone from transforming into a dragon. At least, he was certain of that, until the exact moment he noticed the medallion had suddenly vanished. It turned out that during a brief clash, Ellie had skillfully ripped that precious artifact right off him. Without wasting a second, she passed it to her friend, who had been suppressing monstrous power the entire time. In that instant, the mage transformed into a dragon, because only that form could stop the rampaging Handy. Fighting in the shape of a colossal beast instantly became easier and far more effective. The Dragon Core allowed constant mana regeneration and a stable, uninterrupted flow of energy. Handy no longer held the advantage since he was no longer the biggest and scariest thing in the crater. The crater's main energy node was very close, visibly pulsing with raw power. One final push was needed, but breaking the core required not just brute force, but precision and flexibility. Handy had been stationed here for a reason, as he was considered the primary guardian of the ancient relic. During his service, he had awakened new abilities and learned to fire deadly magical bursts. Only thanks to lightning-fast reflexes did Afir manage to escape a searing, near-lethal strike. If Otis failed his part of the plan, the entire strategy would collapse instantly. Handy had to be eliminated as fast as possible, and the dragon had to be ready for that. The battle drew birds and ordinary villagers from nearby settlements. Meanwhile, the Twisted Boss admitted he was working with the Great Earth and claimed there was a logical reason. The locals hated outsiders and refused to let them live in peace. In his view, to sway Han, he even promised to open a portal back to Earth. The Sword King immediately saw it as manipulation and rejected the offer without hesitation. In response, Alejandro then took a desperate step and performed an experiment on himself mid-fight. He gathered the life force of the strongest hunters and injected the cursed substance into his own body. He became far stronger, but his soul was permanently stained pitch black. That was how humans fully turned into monsters. Han watched the transformation, knowing there was nothing he could do to stop it. Elemental forces intertwined, reshaping the man into something otherworldly. It was now hard to tell what he had become, but his level had doubled. Sensing that something below in the crater was going off script, Alejandro instantly lost interest in the duel. Breaking through Han, the creature charged downward to deal with it personally. He could not be allowed to reach Addis and the girls, or everything would be over. At the same time, Handy was destroyed, and Ellie barely found the strength to stand. The core could only be destroyed using the swordsman technique her mother once taught her. She stepped forward, and for a brief moment everyone allowed themselves to breathe out. It looked like a victory that could no longer be stolen. But at the last second, an old woman appeared, someone who had always seemed kind and harmless. She coldly declared that betraying the master was unacceptable, since he had done too much for them. With those words, she stepped up to Ellie and drove a dagger into her stomach without hesitation. As the wounded girl writhed in pain, the old woman rushed toward the Dragon Core. She activated energy absorption, plunging the entire area into chaos. Now all weaker souls began to vanish, feeding the power of Don Alejandro. The plan that once seemed perfect had just collapsed spectacularly. Every single worker inside the crater was caught in the effect. In his final moments, Kalinor stared at a photograph of his family. He felt his life force drain away and knew he would never return home. Along with many of his friends, he collapsed to the ground, unable to rise ever again. Only the strongest individuals and creatures were still struggling against this crushing wave of energy. Dragons were close, almost within reach, yet even they couldn't directly interfere with what was happening. Addis poured every last reserve into holding the pressure back, trying to block the magical oppression at least partially. It could buy a few precious seconds, but it did nothing to destroy the core itself. By then, Alejandro had already begun celebrating victory. feeling power flood every inch of his body. All foreign energy drained without residue into the demonic core pulsing inside his chest. Han knew defeat was near, but even now he had no intention of dropping to his knees. Aphir pushed herself to the limit, desperately trying to stop the nightmare with everything she had left. She forced streams of energy straight into the core, fully aware it still wouldn't be enough. The core could only be destroyed with a swordswoman's technique, and Ellie clearly knew exactly what had to be done. Over long months of friendship, she had trained Aphir step by step in the art of the blade. Now, if the wyvern became human, she could finally apply everything she had learned. Before, that had been impossible, but now a real chance had appeared. To make it happen, they had to use the very artifact stolen from the Twisted Boss. Aphir was given the chance to become human and attempt to save an entire continent. The magical aura shifted violently, and a pink flash of light swallowed all surrounding darkness. Meanwhile, Alejandro continued savoring his triumph and the feeling of absolute control. His devilish grin fueled Han's rage even more, yet he kept fighting without retreating. Even if the Sword King had no chances left, surrender was never an option. He had survived real hell in the Rocky Mountains, and breaking him now was nearly impossible. He knew Alejandro regenerated like Wolverine, but that didn't slow him down. At the very least, the boss still felt pain, which meant he could still be hurt. Without realizing it, Han was buying time for his friends as they tried to stop the madness. After another burst of magic, everyone witnessed something that could only be called a miracle. The wyvern transformed into a stunning girl with long, flowing hair. She carried the scent of lilies, and a single glance was enough to steal one's breath. You could drown in her bottomless eyes, and there wasn't a trace of malice in them. Aphir quickly scanned her surroundings and prepared to act. She knew she had to hurry, but her body needed time to adjust to the new form. Even a few steps forward were difficult, yet she forced herself to move. Along with her beauty, she retained all her swordsmanship skills and was ready to use them. Her friends remained behind, watching her with eyes full of hope. Han, as usual, showed up at the worst possible moment and smashed straight through the nearest wall. Together with his opponent, he had already wrecked half the crater and showed no signs of stopping. This guy would fit perfectly into the Avengers, where they level half a city first and then claim they saved the world. Aphir was suddenly in danger as the full weight of the battle crashed down on her. Panicking, the girl turned and ran, briefly forgetting her role and purpose. To shield her from falling debris, Han scooped her up and covered her with his own body. Instead of gratitude, he got screaming and immediately felt a bite like a piranha attack. She hated it, yelling, calling him a naked pervert, and struggling to break free. He had to calm her down fast and remind her they had met before and were longtime friends. Now, they had to refocus immediately and stop the Dragon Core. By then, Alejandro had fully regenerated and charged forward again. A brutal head-on strike cracked his skull and proved that raw power still ruled the battlefield. As he was thrown aside, Aphir gained another chance to use her skill. But first she had to stop, steady herself, and assess the situation with a clear mind. Just before Aphir took the decisive step, Ellie stopped her and wished her luck. Aphir barely noticed, too caught up in the chaos unfolding around her. If she had paid closer attention, she would have seen how much blood Ellie had already lost. To buy a little more time, the Sword King kept clashing with the monster, denying himself even a single second of rest. He delivered crushing blows, and the instant the enemy regenerated, he charged back in again and again. To him, it felt like brutal but perfect training, and he was handling it exactly as expected. The moment the area became even slightly safer, Aphir prepared to pull off a real miracle. Magical tendrils instantly lunged toward her, trying to block her path to the core. A moonlight step, light feet, and zero fear in her eyes let her push straight through. Flexibility and speed saved her from lethal strikes and steadily closed the distance. When the monster realized what was happening, it roared like a dragon writhing in agony. Han held it back with his last strength, boots digging into the ground as his massive sword stopped the charge. That effort was no longer needed, because Aphir landed the exact strike that ended the suffering. A wave of magic burst outward, freeing the people of the continent from the looming threat. At the same time, Han unleashed a devastating blow, and Alejandro finally lost his ability to regenerate. The crater's explosion was visible even from nearby islands, and many mistook it for the end of the world, like when the Oppenheimer trailer dropped. Sadly, Ellie never witnessed this triumph, as her heart had stopped only a moment earlier. Even so, she knew she had made the right choice, and her sacrifice would not be in vain. Just moments later, clouds swallowed the sky and relentless rain poured down. That day's victory truly felt like a miracle, with everything stacked against the people of Ratna. The human experiments planned by the Great Earth were officially confirmed. People below level 10, who had lost their life force, began returning from the brink. Each of them could return to normal life, though a therapist would probably be a good idea. 36 deaths were recorded, most of them those who had been turned into monsters. This defeat shattered all of the Great Earth's plans, even though victory had been just one step away. From that day on, those who defeated Alejandro were called true heroes. Yet none of them even thought about celebrating. There were no cheers, no smiles, no joyful cries. Even the sound of rain seemed hesitant to break the heavy, lifeless silence. All the heroes were taken under the protection of the Order of Light and granted several days of rest. Certain facts were deliberately hidden to avoid frightening ordinary people. Han and Addis recovered fairly quickly, felt fine, and were satisfied with what they had accomplished. During a conversation with the priest, both of them sensed that something was off. He kept repeating that there were far too many people who hated outsiders. Emil Otto seemed to be preparing them for something important, guiding them through a dark maze of corridors. The priest repeatedly reminded them that some laws had been written long before his birth. After the mission ended, a serious investigation into the incident began. Ifer had worked alongside Ellie under Alejandro, and now she was considered a potential criminal. In a week, she would face trial, where her fate would be decided like at school. One rumor, and you are canceled forever. No matter how hard Emil tried to help, his words carried very little weight. People had suffered too much from outsiders and wanted nothing to do with second chances. If Ifer's cooperation with outsiders was confirmed, she faced life imprisonment. Even so, she tried not to lose heart and kept up at least a visible sense of positivity. Han and Emil went for a walk, leaving the two friends to talk alone. It became clear that the girl's psyche could not handle such sudden changes in life. At first, she said she was happy, smiling as she remembered the days spent with her friend. They were almost always together, and those memories were carved into her heart forever. But only a minute later, Ifer began to cry and blamed Ellie for taking unnecessary risks. They could have run away and lived safely, without constant battles and threats. Addis supported his friend in every way and promised he would definitely come up with something. Loss is always painful, but in this cruel world, one has to be ready for it. There was no doubt that Ellie was proud of Afir and believed they would meet again someday. Meanwhile, Han was also trying to do something, since his bond with the Wyvern had helped him survive and find his place on the continent. It turned out that under certain conditions, an indulgence could be granted, and even the judge's verdict could be nudged in the right direction. That privilege was reserved only for those who truly helped the Order of Light and proved their worth through action, not words. The heroes had already made serious progress in their careers, and now just one successful mission stood between them and absolution. If they could eliminate one of the church's key problems, they would gain a real chance to save their friend. All they had to do was destroy a ghost, and at first glance, it sounded like an easy job. Reality was far darker. Every hunter who had faced this problem before never made it back home alive. The ghost of the Dark House had been waiting for a new victim for a long time, and only God knew how this would end. After Alejandro's death, a shard of a demonic god fell into truly dangerous hands. The agents of Great Earth stepped in just in time and managed to secure this extremely valuable artifact. Their main plans had been shattered, but even so, none of them were ready to give up. They quickly realized they were dealing with well-prepared enemies who needed to be erased as soon as possible. If things escalated to the Inquisitors, it would turn into a real bloodbath with zero room for compromise. To avoid that outcome, Leslie suggested an alternative solution. She proposed using the shard of the demonic god to create something new, something capable of consuming the world itself. And to get rid of extra problems, there was always the option of calling in an old, reliable acquaintance. A ghost working as part of the team was ready to help and handle several objectives at once. If a level 35 monster pulled it off, Great Earth would get a chance to start over. Once upon a time, a happy family lived in this house, until a bloody and irreversible conflict shattered everything. Later, Great Earth bought the property and began conducting cruel, forbidden experiments inside. The place hid countless secrets, and deadly traps were installed all around to protect them. Many hunters never told the world about those traps because the ghost never let them go home. The monster, wearing a satisfied grin, prepared to welcome new guests and dreamed of kicking off the party as soon as possible. When 4 days passed and no one showed up, the ghost began to lose its old excitement. A few more days went by, and the monster stopped waiting altogether, deciding it had all been some kind of cruel joke. At that very moment, a team of 3 appeared in the nearby forest, ready to put an end to the ghost. Until the trial, Afir was allowed to move freely under supervision and handle almost any task. All 3 were officially recognized as heroes, and they were cleared for missions without unnecessary questions. At first glance, they weren't scared at all, and even thought they had stumbled into a... The ghost absolutely hated that, since every piece of scenery was designed purely to terrify. Addis immediately warned that they had to move with maximum caution because there were only 3 of them. No one was coming to save them if things went wrong, so they had to rely solely on themselves. Han looked like an unbeatable killer at first glance, but in reality, he was absolutely terrified of ghosts. As a kid, he had binge-watched every part of The Ring, and ever since then, even small things freaked him out. It looked funny now, but very soon that fear would unexpectedly save his life. Addis suggested splitting up, knowing that in a real emergency, he could always turn into a dragon. Afir deliberately scared her friend, doing everything she could just to have a little fun. She had spent her entire life in a dark cave, and had long forgotten what fear of the dark even was. At some point, the first signs of basic activity level began to surface. Nothing critical was happening, but Han started shaking like a little kid. He completely forgot about the mission and just bolted forward without thinking. A sea of traps lay ahead, but he didn't even notice them and smashed straight through, like an armored train. Pure Dom Toretto energy where family matters more than walls. Years had gone into building those traps, and now they were wiped out in a single second. Afer decided not to lag behind and jumped in as well, finishing off the already wounded monsters. After turning human, she became a level 6 swordsman, so underestimating her was a mistake. For a few more minutes, she tried to calm Han down, doing her best to steady him. He acted like he wasn't scared at all, even though sweat was pouring off him like he was sitting in a sauna. The mission needed to end fast, and at that exact moment, the mistress of the house appeared. Her bottomless black eyes and rotting skin inspired raw, animal terror in anyone who met her gaze. That alone was enough for the fighter battling demonic hounds to nearly die from fear. He instantly turned around and ran for his life, completely forgetting about the little girl left behind. The real problem was that getting out of this place turned out to be way harder than it looked at first glance. After smashing through yet another wall, Han realized with surprise that he had ended up in the exact same corridor again. That meant that just a week before Afer's trial, the entire Hunter squad had walked straight into a carefully engineered trap. For several long minutes, the ghost stayed close, never showing herself directly, never fully disappearing either. Bit by bit, it became clear that the mistress of the house never attacked personally. She was simply controlling every trap in this place. Han stopped being afraid of the girl and even learned her real name, Maria. Afir told him to stay calm and casually revealed a few key secrets about how the house actually worked. Everything here followed the same logic as classic dungeon mechanics. To escape, they had to find a local artifact, a kind of master key capable of lifting all restrictions. The search kicked off immediately, and Maria invited the guests into the main hall of the house. She promised it would be very interesting and politely suggested ignoring the bloodstains. Countless hidden traps stood ready to shred the intruders apart at any second. Han only smirked, clearly happy to accept the challenge. Together with Afir, they began hopping over traps as if it were a casual obstacle course in some extreme amusement park. Neither of them even broke a sweat, though Maria was still confident her plan would work. Even a small pool filled with crocodiles felt like a luxury resort to someone who had survived the Rocky Mountains. Soon, it was time to face the boss of this room, a massive black mamba. This anaconda-sized venom monster was meant to be a serious threat, but things went completely off script. Now, let's jump back to Addis, who had pushed deeper into the southern wing of the house, straight toward the basement. Mages were always highly valued, simply because there were so few of them among hunters. Truly trained professional mages made up no more than 2% of the total. Most of them graduated from universities in the Mage Kingdom and had access to advanced theories from a developed world. That was why Addis immediately sensed he had found something truly important. Few people knew this, but he had graduated from the Academy of Thinkers, specializing in advanced spellcraft. One glance at the documents left behind was enough for him to realize the entire team was in serious danger. Addis rushed off to find his friends, hoping it wasn't too late to escape. Bursting outside, he scanned the area and instantly understood that coming here had been a massive mistake. The house was already starting to fade away, and the team was trapped inside a conditional space disconnected from reality. By then, Maria had almost forgotten her original cruel intentions. Loneliness had tortured her for far too long, and meeting new people felt like salvation. For a brief moment she relaxed, then remembered the real reason she remained bound to this house. Maria barely noticed how close she had grown to people who seemed fearless. They had destroyed every trap, defeated the room boss, and even managed to cook the venomous snake's meat. To Maria, it looked like madness. No one had ever behaved like this in her house before. Han tried to calm their new acquaintance and explained that they had no reason to fear each other. Her entire life, she had been abandoned or used, but it was never too late to find real friends. If Maria wished, she could stay with them and become part of something bigger. That offer shattered her worldview, and the ghost's psyche began to crack. Fueled by inner turmoil, the walls of the house started collapsing as if Godzilla himself had dropped by. By then, Addis had reunited with the group and insisted they needed to escape immediately. To do that, they had to find the key that opened every door in the cursed house. After a short pause, the truth about the key became obvious. It wasn't a soulless object, but a living person who had been with them all along. Maria only appeared to be a spirit. In reality, she was a cursed woman. They tried to explain that Leslie and Richard had abandoned her, planning to destroy the house along with the hunters. Maria refused to believe it and stayed loyal to her former friends until the very end. In desperation, she lashed out against the hunters, trying to force doubt away. Han reacted instantly and shielded his friends, taking the hit himself. He was sure he could tank the attack without issue, not realizing ghosts fought by different rules. At first glance, it looked like he was unharmed and everything was under control. A fear instantly rushed to her friend, trying to force him to pull back before things went completely off the rails. What she saw froze her in place, icy chills crawling straight down her spine. The strongest warrior on the team had clearly lost it and was starting to morph into something ghost-like and wrong. He triggered a vertical strike technique, and only a split second stood between a fear and guaranteed death. While Addis struggled to block the falling rubble, the wyvern was hanging on the edge of annihilation. He caught the scene just in time and lunged in without hesitation. The dragon managed to stop the blow despite the insane gap in raw physical power. A ghost had slipped into Han's mind, and a brutal internal war was raging inside him right now. His friends tried to reach him, but all they got back were broken, unhinged screams. Moments later, the Sword King literally started fighting himself. One second he rushed Addis, the next he smashed his own face with his fist. The hunters had never seen anything this unhinged in their lives. Despite the madness, the guards casually gave a thumbs up, acting like everything was somehow under control. Now, the scene shifts inside his mind, where the real battle was unfolding. Fighting a ghost only looks easy at first glance, even for a warrior from Volterra. Memories were exchanged, and it became clear that even Han carried a deep personal darkness. The pain was unbearable, and every mental wound tightened Maria's grip over his body. On top of that, he had spent more than 22 years completely alone in the Rocky Mountains, and that kind of isolation never comes free. The strangest part was that the effect worked both ways. For a dark soul like Maria, being trapped in the mansion had become her own private tragedy. They kept trading memories, locked in an endless internal clash. It felt like it could go on forever, at least until one of them finally broke. Then, a blinding flash of light cut through everything, bringing the battle to its natural end. At the same time, Addis was desperately working through spell formulas that might pull his friend out of the spectral realm. The knowledge he gained at the academy mattered more than ever, especially with the crystal he found in the lab. He would later learn it was a shard of the demon Omplus, but right now, that detail meant nothing. Through a mirrored artifact, Leslie calmly observed every second of the situation. It was obvious the hunters had swallowed the bait and were now one step away from total destruction. The satisfied outsiders had no doubts about their success and were already prepping for the next task that brought them to the Magic Kingdom. A serious meeting was about to happen here, the kind you attend without an invitation. Everything had to be done quietly and with maximum precision so the mages wouldn't notice a thing. The Thinkers Mage Guild was the continent's first elite division of high-level spellcasters. When noble houses began mass-collecting magical tools, the Thinkers skyrocketed in influence. The symposium became the place where new artifacts were flexed and the world's most powerful figures gathered. Everyone showed off their loot there, and impressing anyone was almost impossible. The Great Earth's agents slipped past security without raising a single alarm. In one corridor, they ran straight into a massive combat robot clearly built to kill on sight. The machine instantly flagged them as threats and attacked without hesitation. It was the perfect moment to see what a man named Richard was really capable of. He needed only a few clean, effortless movements to secure the win. An aura blade combined with a diagonal strike erased the giant Terminator from existence. That was what real clean work looked like. After that, confident footsteps echoed down the corridor, sharp and deliberate, heels clicking against stone. Her presence radiated calm authority, and fear clearly had no place near her. The moment they saw her face, two mercenaries dropped to their knees, apologizing like security guards when Taylor Swift walks into the room. Standing before them was a living legend, one of the four heroes, the Archmage Genovia. The scene cuts back into Han's mind, where the fading light still lingered. When Maria opened her eyes, she thought she had died and ended up somewhere deep in hell. She was convinced the others escaped the mansion and were finally safe. Maria wasn't even that upset, believing she had lived a pointless life without ever doing something truly good. At last, peace was supposed to reach her, or at least that's how it felt in those first fragile seconds. Then a dog slowly walked past her, acting like it had been quietly listening to her thoughts the whole time. It stopped, calmly turned its head, and started talking, telling her to quit the drama and stop acting like a kid. The dog made it clear that everything was already over, and all she had to do was stop and refuse to move forward anymore. In the same instant, horrific monsters burst into the ghost's vision like they had just crawled straight out of a bottomless abyss. Maria couldn't hide her shock and, for the first time since becoming a ghost, felt real fear claw into her chest. She realized she was inside this guy's mind and finally understood how much pain he had endured. From that moment on, she saw him differently, not as a monster, but as a man shattered by severe post-traumatic trauma. Maria completely withdrew from his consciousness, and by then, Addis had already finished constructing a complex and dangerous ritual. All that remained was to use his skills and try to break free from this nightmare that felt like pure hell. When it was over, the illusion fully collapsed, and no hunter ever became a victim of the haunted house again. The sun appeared out of nowhere, and the stench of dampness, blood, and slime vanished as if it had never existed. Han finally came to his senses and nearly crushed his friends in a sudden bone-breaking hug. All of them felt overwhelming relief while trying to figure out what the hell came next. Among endless debris and ruins, they spotted Maria, now fully transformed into a human. Escaping the haunted house felt like a reset for her body, and there was no longer any reason to remain a prisoner of cruel people. It was time for a serious choice: become her own person or stay trapped forever in the illusions of the past. Of course it was hard, especially for someone who had never known anything resembling a normal life. Still, after a short pause, she felt these people were genuinely trustworthy. They seemed kind and real, and honestly, she had nowhere else left to go. Behind the destroyed house, the hunters found a vehicle belonging to the Great Earth. It was a top-tier carriage, the kind you buy only with millions of gold coins, like a front-row Super Bowl ticket. While stuck in the basement, Addis had learned a lot about his enemies' plans and hidden threats. Most likely, a spy was hiding inside the Thinkers Association, and this had to be reported immediately. Returning to the Holy Order was no longer an option, so they headed straight for the Kingdom of Mages. For the first few minutes, no one could activate the carriage, as if some crucial part was missing. In the end, the wizard realized he had to use the blessing of the demonic god, fully aware of the risk. Even a small shard was enough to launch an insanely fast means of transportation. Several hours passed before the hunters could even slightly adjust to the insane flight speed. It felt like they had bent time itself, racing at full throttle to once again wreck the plans of the Great Earth. By then, Archmage Genovia had already begun her grand presentation. When she stepped onto the stage, the entire hall fell silent, watching her inventions with held breath. After receiving the blessing of the goddesses, all four heroes reached level 100 and stopped aging forever. Their names were engraved in golden letters in the history books of this world. The people of Valterra knew very little about them, and it was time to fix that. The strongest among the heroes was considered to be Bao, also known as the True Sword King. That was the name people eventually began using for Han, clearly drawing parallels to the legendary hero of the past. Holly was impossible to ignore as well, famous for her mastery as a spiritualist of life and death. The team also included the greatest magic swordsman in the world, Karhan the Terrible. It felt like no one in this world could possibly challenge them. They were the strongest heroes alive, and only a lunatic would dare mock them. After the official presentation ended, the heroes decided to talk among themselves for a bit. Notably absent was Bao, who had long been listed as missing in action. They discussed small matters and future plans until Leslie suddenly walked into the room. It turned out that thanks to the Great Earth, the heroes had a chance to restore the blessing of the demonic god. The crystal was now in their possession, and they could finally move forward with their true objective. Opening a portal, they stepped into a cosmic void filled with strange harmony. A being began to form out of the weightless emptiness, vaguely resembling a human shape. It was the main assistant of the goddess of darkness, named Kevriel. She looked exactly like the goddess herself, but everyone simply called her Kiwi. The heroes approached the ancient altar to face the entity and formally carry out the order they had received. By every rule, the moment the portal opened, they were supposed to appear before the goddess's copy without delay. Only Karhan and Zenobia stepped forward, the acknowledged leaders of the entire squad. Instead of showing the expected reverence, they chose to play by their own rules and skipped all the pointless ceremony. The great swordsman calmly drew his blade and, in a single motion, beheaded the goddess's copy. The heroes made it clear they didn't care about the rules and now aimed to become gods themselves, like Monopoly players swiping the bank on turn 1. In that instant, it became obvious they hadn't come for answers, but for a precise and dangerous objective. 20 years ago, they were the ones who fought invaders from other worlds, who had sided with the demon god. The heroes sacrificed their youth and shattered bodies to fight in the name of the goddesses and save the world. Victory came at a brutal price, demanding everything they had, leaving nothing behind. After receiving the blessing, the heroes rebuilt ruined cities, gained wisdom, and reclaimed their lost youth. From that day on, they knew exactly how long they had left to live, and that knowledge weighed heavily on the world's saviors. The gods were convinced the heroes would never desire immortality, and that was their greatest mistake. As the years passed, miracles faded, and a quiet hunger for something greater grew inside each hero. It wasn't fear of death, since any hunter accepts that outcome sooner or later. The real disappointment was watching the goddesses simply observe as the world slowly slid into chaos. Without the heroes' interference, the goddesses would have stayed on the sidelines while the world burned to nothing. To take control of Ratna, the gods had to be removed and a new world order established. At last, the heroes reached this realization, understanding they were strong enough to challenge the gods directly. Only by gaining immortality could they truly protect this world in the long run. During the clash with the divine copies, Zenobia suddenly vanished without a trace. Karhan was left alone before the goddess, who saw straight through him and hid none of her superiority. She demonstrated just how helpless a warrior is against pure divine power. In that moment, Karhan cursed the goddess of darkness and swore to one day take her scalp with his own hands. After that, Karhan sank into an empty, endless darkness he couldn't escape for a long time. Meanwhile, the hunter team arrived at the crater, where a court session was taking place at that very moment. They decided to postpone the trip to the Magic City and at least deliver a letter about the possible spy. Otis made a serious mistake, believing the Supreme Mages still had the situation under control. He had no idea how deeply rotten this world was on the inside. If anyone had claimed the heroes chose to betray the goddesses, no one would have believed it. At the very least, he used the shard of the demonic god to significantly boost his own strength. The fragment was sealed into a bracelet, hiding a wide range of abilities inside. His magical power surged instantly, though much work remained to unlock its full potential. It was only a broken shard of the crystal, meaning the magic was still unstable and incomplete. If the Great Earth had acted just a little more carefully, the hunters would never have escaped the haunted house. In that dark moment, Han wondered what would have happened if he had never left the Rocky Mountains. Most likely, he would have gone insane, ended his life, or turned into one of the Devil's Hounds. But none of that mattered anymore. The past had to be left behind to move forward with those who truly cared about him. While the warrior of Volterra reflected on fate, the heroes of this world continued reshaping reality itself. In truth, nothing had happened to the heroes. They were still alive and acting as they always had. Goddesses, unlike humans, exist as higher dimensional beings on a different plane of reality. They were thought to be impossible to attack and destroy completely, at least until today. Dimensional sealing magic was now fully accessible to Karhan and Zenobia. They managed to imprison the goddess of darkness and seize total control over her essence. The irony was that the goddess didn't even realize her situation and still believed she ruled the space around her. The moment her head was severed, she was silently sealed inside a magical sphere without any sign of struggle. Her energy was now being absorbed little by little, bringing the heroes closer to immortality. To keep the goddess imprisoned, the heroes could not leave this neutral space. Even so, they could still use their powers and influence the real world. All it required was subtle interference, something as simple as setting one religion against another. The time had come to cleanse this world, even if it meant truly getting his hands dirty and crossing lines that could never be uncrossed. Afer was fully acquitted in the case of cooperating with invaders and officially cleared of all charges. Now that Addis had finally formed a complete team, she became a full-fledged hunter with legal status. For a girl who had lived her entire life trapped in a wyvern's body and known no other path, this was a massive personal victory. Han also agreed to join the team, knowing that to face the goddesses, he had to keep winning and make his name echo across the world. During registration at the guild, one strange and seemingly insignificant detail caught his attention. A young guy with the most basic gear showed up to register, looking like someone just starting a hunter's career. The problem was that he was already level 20, and people like that were usually seasoned adventurers by now. It felt like he wasn't who he pretended to be, just playing the rookie role, a classic Valorant smurf pretending it's day one while wiping everyone. According to him, he came from Shanghai and went by a simple name, a warrior called Sana. Now, the scene shifts to the northeastern reaches of the ancient kingdom of Cauldry. It was here, on a snow-covered mountain, that the people locals called invaders had appeared. Ordinary citizens scattered in panic, terror written clearly across their faces. That always happens when they see inquisitors of the Dark Brotherhood. One man tried to flee, carrying with him the blessing of a demonic god. A shard of the crystal was clenched in his hand, pulsing with dark energy. The chief inquisitor would never allow him to escape that easily. At first, the man pretended he was just living in these lands for family and a peaceful life. He deliberately stalled for time, trying to distract attention and prepare his weapon. The sly worm suddenly pulled a gun and fired straight into the Inquisitor's chest, like a GTA NPC pulling heat with no cutscene. It wasn't enough to kill him, and the payback came instantly. The blow was so brutal that the criminal smashed through a nearby stone wall with his back. He stayed alive only because the Inquisitor had reasons to prolong his suffering. What he needed was the crystal shard, and then maybe no one else would get hurt. But by then, the fragment had already been absorbed, meaning a bloody grinder was unavoidable. A normal human had taken in far too much black magic to keep his original body. In mere moments, he transformed into a massive monster and crushed his enemy in one hand. The merciless giant looked like he was challenging reality itself. He had hidden the crystal shard for a long time and used it only at the most critical moment. To truly enrage the Inquisitor, he tore the annoying mask right off his face. Inquisitors hate when anyone touches their face, because after that, blood always follows. With one sharp motion, the Dark Brotherhood agent ripped a finger clean off the monster's hand. A brutal slaughter followed, but that part doesn't matter now, as the story returns to the Crater Gorge. This was where the truly important events were unfolding today. Several weeks had passed since the last meeting with Han's team, and in that time, everything had changed. Afer was no longer a frightened girl. Now she stood as a true professional of war. She fought monsters, while a level 50 gladiator stood nearby. Opposite them loomed a gigantic caterpillar, capable of crushing even King Kong. The gladiator and his assistant chose not to gamble and wisely retreated. Ahead of them stood a fearless girl who leaped straight toward her own death. Only at the last moment did she open her eyes and draw a gleaming sword. The caterpillar had clearly overestimated itself and suffered a fatal wound. To finish the monster for good, a red-haired Krasavitz stepped onto the battlefield. Using a mysterious magical artifact, he activated razor-sharp ice spikes. The people watching the fight were left speechless, afraid to even breathe. They had never seen a technique like this in their entire lives. Only after looking closer did the spectators realize that the man before them was Sir Addis. Stories about this guy had long spread throughout the city and far beyond it. The most interesting part was that two more fighters had joined the team, old acquaintances, Martin and Brad. Yet, scanning the area, it was hard to spot the hunter's main warrior. The Voltarian fighter had vanished without a trace, and the grim faces of his friends made it clear something terrible had happened. Right now, deep underground, lay the very prison people were afraid to mention out loud. In the most heavily guarded cell sat a man whose arms and legs were completely immobilized. Just moments ago, the system had once again offered him the option to end his own life to escape the endless torment.